Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Tove Tunnies. Tove Tunnies was born in May 20, 2001, in Sweden. She grew up in the small suburban town of Vetlanda. Home to just over 10 residents, Vetlanda is a quiet place where everyone knows each other, and incidents of crime are very rare, making any unusual event a topic of local interest. A few years before the tragic events, Tove decided to pursue her studies at a university in a larger city about 200 kilometers away. Enrolling in the medical faculty, however, by 2022, she realized that this career path was not right for her. To take some time to reflect and possibly consider a different field, she decided to take a year off and move back in with her family while living with her parents and twin sister. Tove quickly found a job as a substitute teacher at a local school. This role allowed her to support herself, and she soon moved into a rental apartment. Tove excelled as a teacher, forming strong connections with her students and earning high regard from her colleagues and supervisors, known for her cheerful demeanor. She was not only recognized as a teacher, but also as an enthusiastic football player, having played for the local football club since childhood, just like her twin sister. On Saturday, October 15, 2022, Tove went to a nightclub that featured a bar, bowling, and live music, hoping to have a fun night with her friends. While there, she unexpectedly ran into two acquaintances, Johanna Jansen, who was 20, and Maya Hellman, who was 18. Tove and Maya had been close friends for a while, having met at a mutual friend's party a few years earlier. Since then, they often went dancing together. Johanna was sociable and popular, with many friends. While Maya was more reserved but still well-liked, Johanna was also Maya's best friend, and Tove had become part of their close circle, despite their friendship. The dynamics among the three girls were often unpredictable. There was a noticeable tension between Tove and Johanna, stemming from a past incident in 2019 when they both unknowingly dated the same guy. After discovering the truth, they had a fight but eventually reconciled. However, the memory of that situation lingered, especially when jealousy over boys at parties arose, creating a sense of rivalry between them. Maya often played the peacemaker, helping to resolve conflicts, but tensions would resurface. In the summer of 2021, Tove and Johanna decided to reassess their friendship and let go of past grievances. They started spending more time together, enjoying walks and conversations. Unfortunately, this peaceful phase was short-lived, as by early 2022, disagreements arose again, primarily about boys. Maya recalled this as their most significant fight. Consequently, their communication broke down once more, and they only began talking again in the fall of 2022. Although their relationship still felt strained at the nightclub, initially, they engaged in casual conversation for a couple of hours. By midnight, Maya realized she had lost track of Johanna and Tove and asked the bartender for help. It turned out that Johanna and Tove had stepped outside and were involved in a loud argument around 1 a.m. They returned to the club just as it was starting to close, and all patrons were being asked to leave. As they exited, another argument broke out, which escalated into a fight. Tove texted her boyfriend, saying, "Johanna hit me." Despite this, the friends decided to resolve their issues through conversation instead of escalating the conflict. Tove had arrived at the party on her bicycle, but planned to walk home. The walk would take about 30 minutes. Tove chose to walk with her friends, who wanted to calmly discuss and settle their disagreements once and for all. A moment later, the three of them arrived at Johanna's house. Initially, they planned to leave without entering, but they later decided to go inside for a cup of coffee to make amends. At 1:48 a.m., Tove called her boyfriend and told him that after the party, she went to her friend's place and that everything was fine. He didn't detect anything unusual in her calm tone, but he became concerned when he found out Tove was at Johanna's apartment. He worried that the girls might start arguing again. Tove reassured him that everything was okay and that she would be home soon. The next morning, Tov's mother tried to contact her daughter, but there was no response. They had planned to go shopping together that day. By 10 a.m., Tove still hadn't replied. Concerned, her family decided to check her house. They found the door locked and received no answer. About 9 hours after Tove last communicated with her boyfriend, Tov's mother contacted the police. Initially, the police didn't take Tov's mother's concerns seriously, thinking it was normal for young people to be out late after a night at a bar. However, Tov's mother was persistent and eventually convinced the officers to take action. They interviewed Tov's mothers to understand the recent dynamics between Tove and her friends. When they learned about a conflict between Tove and one of her friends, they began to suspect that it might be connected to her disappearance. Tove's mobile phone was examined, revealing that it last connected around 4 a.m. on October 16. The signal was detected several kilometers away from her home, and the phone was turned off near marshy land. This area was chosen as the starting point for the search for Tove or any clues about her whereabouts. At the time Tove's phone last connected, Johanna and Maya were at Johanna's house. Detectives interviewed the girls in detail about their evening together and inquired about any conflicts among them. As they were the last people to see Tove alive, both girls were considered suspects, but were released because there was no evidence to charge them. They denied any involvement in Tove's disappearance, explaining that, after an argument, they reconciled and spent a calm evening with Tove at Johanna's house before they parted ways. They had not seen Tove since then. Detectives went to Tove's home to conduct searches, but found nothing suspicious. It seemed that Tove had not returned that night after meeting with her friends. It was then decided to go to Johanna's apartment, which was under renovation, so all the rooms were quite dusty but sterile clean. Moreover, there was a strong smell of cleaning products. On the bed, the police discovered a new sheet that did not match the color of the other bedding. It seemed that the sheet stood out against the rest of the set, as if it had been replaced quite recently. Johanna could not fully explain what had happened with the sheet and even refused to show it to the officers. In the kitchen, a large roll of black garbage bags was found, as well as a large container of bleach and a bottle of medical alcohol. Despite all this, no signs of a struggle or bloodstains were seen in the apartment. After the searches, it was decided to talk to Johanna and Maya once again, and they were officially interrogated. Both agreed to cooperate with the police and calmly answered the investigators' questions. Johanna seemed particularly calm. The girl's behavior appeared somewhat strange in light of the fact that it concerned the disappearance of their close friend. Johanna admitted that they had a fight the night before Tove's disappearance while at the bar. Moreover, Johanna recounted how a conflict arose between the girls, and she also mentioned that Tove had physically attacked her. Maya also described the argument that occurred between the friends. However, according to her, it seemed much less aggressive and brutal than how Johanna described it. This became the first clear contradiction that detectives discovered. Investigators checked the girls' mobile phones, and thanks to geolocation data, it was confirmed that they had all been at Johanna's house for a long time before Tove's disappearance. All of this sounded suspicious, as it seemed that they were either covering for each other or were accomplices in a crime during this period. Search teams continued to survey the area, and special dog units were brought in. Initially, the police conducted searches within a radius of 1.5 kilometers around the point where the last signal from Tove's phone was recorded. However, it quickly became clear that finding her there would not be possible, as there were no traces indicating the missing person. The search area was then expanded to the surroundings of the city. The day after re-interviewing Tove's friends, the police also publicly announced her disappearance, which sparked a wide public response. All local newspapers began publishing headlines about the search operation, along with photographs of hundreds of volunteers who took to the streets. By October 20, Johanna and Maya were arrested on suspicion of kidnapping. Both girls continued to insist on their innocence. However, By that time, the police had witnesses who would later help unravel the mystery of Tove's disappearance. One of the key figures in this case was Johanna's neighbor, whose real name was not disclosed to the public for safety reasons. According to this young man, he heard suspicious thuds coming from his neighbor's apartment around 3 a.m. At first, he did not pay attention to them, but the dull thuds continued for over an hour. He lived directly below her and decided to go out into the stairwell to listen more closely. He then decided to call his neighbor to make sure she was okay. He rang the doorbell twice, but no one answered. Instead, he heard silence as he was leaving. There were even more knocks, which became more frequent and faster, according to the neighbor. There followed about 10 to 15 dull thuds in a row before it went completely quiet. He estimated that everything was happening around the bathroom area of the apartment. He had already descended the stairs to his floor. As soon as he opened his door, he heard a door slam shut upstairs, Johanna's door. He looked outside and saw Johanna walking down the stairs. She smiled and apologized for the noise. Explaining that she had a friend over and they had been drinking, she admitted that she and her friend had drunk too much, which was the reason they had been feeling sick in the bathroom, despite her neighbor's confusion. Johanna reassured him that there would be no more noise because her friend was now feeling better and had fallen asleep on the couch. Johanna then mentioned that she was planning to grab a late-night snack at McDonald's, where she would buy a cheeseburger. The neighbor kindly offered to drive her there, and Johanna accepted his offer when they stepped outside around 3 a.m. The neighbor noticed a bicycle in the middle of the driveway. He moved it and propped it against the fence to clear the way. Johanna explained that her friend had left it there and had probably forgotten to park it properly. The neighbor inquired about Johanna's friend several times because he found the unusual noise concerning. It didn't sound like vomiting and had lasted too long. He worried that her friend might need medical help, but Johanna assured him that everything was okay. She quickly changed the subject, seemingly trying to avoid talking about her friend, whom she claimed was resting at home. They ate cheeseburgers, and Johanna took one for her friend the following day. The bicycle that had been parked by the driveway was gone. Johanna mentioned that her friend was feeling better in the morning and had supposedly gone home with her when the neighbor spoke to the police. He remarked on how odd Johanna's behavior seemed, especially in light of the troubling news about Tove's disappearance. As the detectives examined Johanna's phone data during the investigation, they discovered that her trip to McDonald's was not the only one that night. Interestingly, they found that Tove's phone had movements that matched Johanna's exactly. When asked about this, Johanna couldn't explain why Tove's phone was moving, since Tove was not with them. However, the device actually moved and was later recorded at a nearby gas station before heading into a forest. Even more suspicious, Johanna returned to this location the following day. This is also where Tove's phone was last found. Search teams quickly intensified their efforts. On November 2, searchers scoured the wooded area near the city and discovered something unusual about 8 meters from the embankment. Hidden under the forest undergrowth, the ground was disturbed, with charred fragments and several plastic bags scattered about. Analysis later showed that these bags were identical to those found in Johanna's home. Under a thin layer of soil, severely burned human remains were uncovered. Identifiable only through forensic dental examinations, autopsy results revealed that the victim was Tove Tani's. The body was wrapped in a sheet that did not match any found in Johanna's home. Forensic experts collected important evidence from the crime scene, many of which were also discovered in Johanna's apartment. The police found that. The next day, immediately after the murder, Johanna visited several hardware stores in the city. Surveillance footage showed that she bought a new sheet, gasoline, and 3 bottles of surgical alcohol. These same items were recovered from the fire site in the forest to further investigate Johanna's involvement. The police examined her internet search history. In January, she had been looking up information about how to dispose of a body, the punishments for murder in Sweden, and the behaviors expected in women's prisons. It appeared that she had been planning the murder for nearly a year before it occurred. Johanna was charged with first-degree murder and attempting to destroy evidence. Based on the gathered information, she insisted that she had nothing to do with Tov's death. A memorial was held for Tove on the soccer field of her hometown, where she had played since childhood. Over 200 people attended to honor her memory by releasing glowing lanterns into the sky as new revelations emerged. Suspicions against Johanna grew, adding pressure on the young suspects involved. The entire nation of Sweden closely followed the investigation. Eventually, Maja came forward, expressing her willingness to cooperate with the authorities. Maja explained that shortly after she, Johanna, and Tove arrived at Johanna's apartment, another argument broke out. When things quieted down, Maja, extremely tired, lay down on her friend's bed and quickly fell asleep. In the night, she was suddenly awakened by Johanna. Maja was shocked to see Tove lying in the hallway. Johanna told Maja that Tove had fallen and hit her head in the bathroom, knocking her unconscious. They checked for a pulse but found none. Tove was dead. Frightened, they decided to dispose of her body. A few weeks later, Johanna chose to cooperate with the investigation. She explained that after everyone had calmed down, she wanted to ease the tension by showing Tove the new bathroom in her apartment, which was still under renovation. Johanna intended to showcase the only completed room at that time, however. When she invited Tove to look, Tove reacted sharply, saying there was nothing special to see. This led to Tove pushing Johanna, who then pushed back, causing Tove to fall to the floor. Johanna went over to Tove and asked how she was doing, but instead of answering, Tove grabbed Johanna by the throat and started to choke her. In response, Johanna also grabbed Tove's neck. Trying to defend herself, Maja witnessed the struggle and attempted to separate her friends. But by the time she managed to pull them apart, Tove had stopped breathing. They decided to dispose of the body. While they were occupied, a neighbor came over, so Johanna chose to go for a walk because she was hungry. When she returned, Maja got rid of the bicycle then. Johanna went to the store to buy the necessary supplies. They wrapped the body in a sheet and trash bags, then struggled to load it into Johanna's car. They took it to the forest, soaked it in gasoline, and attempted to set it on fire, hoping it would burn completely. However, the fire quickly extinguished, prompting Johanna to return to the hardware store for more gasoline. She then came back to reignite the body. Johanna and Maja accounts seemed unconvincing, especially Johanna's, and the detectives did not believe that Tove was the one who initiated the fight. At that point, everyone knew Johanna had always been the more aggressive one. When she saw Tove lifeless, it appeared Johanna was satisfied with what had happened. Maja herself doubted it was an accident and suspected that Johanna had killed Tove while she was asleep. The trial started on March 27, 2023, where the jury had to determine if Johanna Jansson and Maja Hellman were guilty of murder. Journalists closely followed the trial. The prosecution argued that both girls were untruthful, according to law enforcement. In a moment of rage, Johanna and Maja attacked Tove, with Maja restraining her while Johanna strangled her. Afterward, they transported Tove to the forest, doused her with a flammable liquid, and set her on fire to conceal their crime. The bathroom was thoroughly examined by forensic experts, who found DNA evidence from Johanna and Maja. The prosecution argued that Maja was less culpable and did not directly participate in the murder or strangle her friend. However, Maja did hold Tove down to prevent her from resisting and assisted in disposing of the body. Forensic tests confirmed that Tove died from strangulation. In court on March 29, 2023, Maja's lawyers claimed she had no part in the attack, insisting she was asleep during the incident. They argued that Maja helped destroy evidence and move the body to the forest out of fear, implying that Johanna may have intimidated her into compliance. In contrast, Johanna's lawyers sought to shift the blame to Maja, suggesting that Johanna alone could not have managed the situation. A key argument made by the defense was that Maja and Tove had just turned 18, while Johanna was older and more experienced. Additionally, Johanna was the more dominant figure in their friendship. However, despite the defense's strong arguments, April 19, the court ruled both girls guilty of first-degree murder. Johanna Jansson and Maya Hellman received life sentences, marking the first time such a sentence was imposed on girls under 21 in Sweden. The fairness of this verdict remains a topic of debate. Both said they would appeal. There are at least two conflicting accounts of what occurred in Johanna's apartment, suggesting that at least one girl is telling the truth, if both are lying. The only person who could clarify the events is already deceased. The lawyers sought to appeal the verdict, and the investigation continued. Revealing new information, it was discovered that a year before the murder, Johanna had expressed hatred towards Tove by writing hateful poems about Tove and her twin sister in January 2022. Johanna attempted to kill Tove by stuffing cardboard through the door and setting fire to the house where Tove and her family lived. Fortunately, the fire was contained, but it caused significant damage to the facade and door. Johanna also told friends she wanted Tove dead, indicating she had both a motive and a strong desire to harm her friend. A few months later, the situation changed. The appellate court acquitted Maya, deciding that the evidence against her for murder was insufficient. However, she was found guilty of obstructing justice for helping to dispose of the body and was sentenced to 1 year in prison. Most people believe that Johanna acted alone in the incident with her friend, while Maya simply assisted in getting rid of the body. Meanwhile, Johanna still insists that her account of events is true. On appeal to the Court of Appeal, October 2023, Johanna Jansson was sentenced to 16 years in prison. She will remain incarcerated until she turns 18 and is required to pay 1 million Swedish kroner to Tove's family. Tove's family have appealed the sentence to the Supreme Court in the hope that Johanna Jansson's sentence will be increased, knowing that her chances of winning her appeal were slim. Johanna attempted to escape from prison with another inmate on New Year's Eve 2024. Their escape plan was uncovered. They intended to take a prison staff member hostage to help them flee. Fortunately, prison authorities discovered the scheme before it could be carried out. Hey detectives, welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Neville and June Bamber. June and Neville became the owners of White House Farm. A Royal Air Force veteran, after many years of service, he transitioned to a position as the master of a small local court. In 1949, June married he at the age of 25, and that same year, they moved into their new farmhouse. Their dream is to have children and build a happy, close family. However, June could not get pregnant. After numerous attempts, they discovered that the issue was genetic, and they would not be able to have biological children. However, they did not lose hope, and they were able to find a way to become parents. The Bamber family adopted 2 children from an orphanage. First, they adopted Sheila, who was just 3 months old, and a few years later, they adopted 6-month-old Jeremy. June and Neville cared for and educated their adopted children conscientiously, giving them all their love and tenderness. As Sheila and Jeremy grew up, they ensured they received a good education by sending them to prestigious private schools with high-quality standards. The Bambers' financial situation was very good, allowing them to take care of themselves and their children fully and comfortably. Like any family, June and Neville also faced problems in their relationship. Not having a biological relationship with your children can sometimes make the situation more complicated. However, for the most part, their family life proceeded smoothly, without any major conflicts. In 1985, Sheila was 28, Jeremy was 24, and their adoptive parents, June and Neville, had just turned 60. That summer was so peaceful, with everyone enjoying the sun and nature, until the early hours of August 7th. At 3:30 a.m., Jeremy was awakened by an unexpected phone call. When he answered, he was shocked when he heard his father, Neville, on the other line. Neville's voice was frantic and distressed. He struggled to explain that Sheila had gone crazy and have weapons. While Jeremy still didn't fully understand what was going on, the call suddenly lost connection. Alarmed, Jeremy immediately contacted the police, relaying what Neville had said. He also warned them that Sheila could be dangerous. Despite the urgency, it took the police an hour and a half to arrive at the scene. By then, it was still dark, and the house was shrouded in shadows. The area was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos Neville had described. Since firearms were reportedly involved, the police approached cautiously, adhering to standard procedures. Then, they decided not to enter the house. Instead, they waited outside, wait for the task force to come and handle it. The police positioned themselves at a safe distance from the house and used a megaphone to try to communicate with anyone inside. For more than 2 hours, police tried to contact Bamber's family, but received no response. During this time, the police asked Jeremy to explain what had happened at the Bamber household the previous day. He explained that the entire family had gathered for dinner the night before. Toward the end of the evening, there had been a minor misunderstanding, but not serious. He also mentioned that he had left a pistol and a .22 caliber carbine with his parents. Both guns were in good working order and loaded. Nearly 3 hours after the first police officers arrived, at approximately 8 a.m., the special forces entered the house. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy and somber. The team cautiously advanced, inspecting the first floor. When they entered the kitchen, they found a scene of chaos. A chair facing down on the ground, and next to it, in a pool of blood, was Neville's lifeless body. He had been shot 8 times, 6 of which hit the head, leaving him with little chance of survival. His hands and face were bruised and scraped, with a broken nose and jaw, shows that he fought back drastic against the attacker. The officers completed their search of the first floor, then, they moving upstairs. Each step had to be made with caution to avoid noise, but this is very difficult. Because the floor is old and makes a creaking sound every time it is moved. On the second floor, in 2 bedrooms, they discovered 4 more bodies. They found June, Sheila, and 2 6-year-old boys, Daniel and Nicholas, all of whom had been fatally shot. June had been struck by 7 bullets, while Daniel and Nicholas sustained 5 and 3 shots, respectively. Sheila was found on the threshold of her parents' bedroom, with 2 gunshot wounds under her chin. In total, 25 bullets were used to kill the 5 members of Bamber family. Initially, police theorized that the Bamber family members had been deliberately killed. But who could have committed such an act? Was the perpetrator an acquaintance of the family, who had long planned to harm them and then finally carried it out? Or was the criminal so clever that he tried to fool the police with a fake clue? These questions remained unanswered, prompting the authorities to immediately begin an investigation. It is remarkable that although Sheila and Jeremy were both very well educated, they grew up with completely different personalities. Jeremy was introverted from a young age, preferred solitude, and did poorly in elementary school. Sheila, on the other hand, always had many friends around her. Jeremy is hot-tempered and has difficulty controlling his emotions. Even though his parents tried to educate him, but he still did not change. Eventually, they decided to send him to boarding school, which happened in 1970, when he was 9 years old. Boarding schools in England at that time were famous for their strict and harsh discipline, applied to all ages of students. Attending such institutions was expensive, but this was not an issue for the Bambers. As soon as Jeremy entered the boarding school, he realized he could no longer behave as he had before, as any disobedience was met with punishment. Unfortunately, he made the mistake of telling his classmates that he had come from an orphanage. His friends used that information to bully him. They often taunted him about being adopted, calling him a bastard. His years at boarding school were a challenging period for him. Although they didn't teach him many good things, they did help him improve his character somewhat. Over time, Jeremy became calmer, went on to university, and successfully graduated. Neville was extremely proud of his son and even bought him a ticket to Australia. For the next 4 years, he traveled extensively across the country, spent time living in New Zealand, and eventually returned to England in 1982. Upon his return, his parents, Neville and June, asked him to work on their farm. Along with the job, they provided him with a place to live, a cottage 6 kilometers from the farm, along with a car and a monthly salary of nearly $1,000, a generous amount for the time. They wanted to ensure that he had a comfortable life and did everything they could to support him. Additionally, they hoped he would help them when they were old. June, a very religious woman, had a hard time accepting the fact that her children had different views and attitudes about religion. Throughout her life, she did everything to guide them toward what she believed was the true path and to bring them closer to God. Unfortunately, her efforts were unsuccessful. So, she had suffered from severe depression, and her mental health had greatly deteriorated. At the time, mental health issues were treated with a crude and outdated method, administering electric shocks to the patient. It was believed that this could positively influence brain function. June's depression wasn't caused solely by her son, Jeremy. Her daughter Sheila, despite her calmer demeanor, also caused her great distress. Sheila enjoyed looking at magazines featuring models in provocative poses. Sheila dreamed of becoming a model and appearing on the cover of such magazines. However, she does not support this. But Sheila's problems don't stop there. One day, Sheila announced to her parents that she was pregnant. In many families, the news might have been met with joy, but the Bamber family is not like that. Sheila was still a teenager and unmarried, which made the situation complicated. June, her adoptive mother, faced a difficult decision. Should she pressure Sheila to have an abortion? As a Christian, June could not condone abortion, but at the same time, allowing the child to be born is unacceptable. Then, June told Sheila to make her own choice, but on the condition that if she had an abortion, no one in the family would know. This makes the relationship between June and Sheila more and more tense. In 1977, despite her parents' objections, Sheila is married to Colin Caffell. They on to have twin sons, Nicholas and Daniel. Initially, their family life seemed happy, but Sheila began to suspect Colin of infidelity. Her suspicions were correct, and she eventually filed for divorce. In 1982, they are officially divorced, which had a devastating impact on Sheila's mental health. She couldn't bear the shock from the divorce, so she fell into depression, and she was eventually admitted to a mental hospital for treatment. Nicholas and Daniel were sent to an orphanage, where they stayed for nearly 2 years. During this time, Sheila's mental health deteriorated further. She became increasingly anxious, frequently spoke about ending her own life and that of her children, whom she believed were possessed by the devil. She was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Meanwhile, Sheila and Jeremy seemed to swap positions with each other. Jeremy, who was a rebel for years, now lives a peaceful and stable life. In 1985, Sheila reconciled with her ex-husband, Colin. Together, they removed Nicholas and Daniel from the orphanage and start a new life together. In August, Neville and June invited Sheila and her family to visit, so they could reunite with their grandchildren, Daniel von Nicholas. They hadn't seen their 2 nephews in a long time. They decided that the family would spend a week together, after which Colin would take the boys on a trip to Norway. On Tuesday, August 6, 1985, Colin brought the boys to the family farm. And everyone gathered at the Bamber house. The day was filled with joy. There was a family dinner, a happy atmosphere, and delicious food. Later, Neville and June asked Sheila to take Daniel and Nicholas back to the orphanage, arguing that she couldn't provide them with a proper education. This suggestion angered Sheila. She replied that she would make the decision herself. The calm atmosphere of the evening was disrupted at 8:30 p.m. Around the same time, Jeremy left the house. Barbara Wilson, the secretary at Bamber Farm, called Neville regarding a work-related matter. When Neville answered, she realized he seemed very annoyed. In the background, she could hear raised voices, as though people were arguing or upset about something. This was unusual for the Bamber family, which surprised she. However, she couldn't learn more about the situation because Neville quickly ended the call and hung up. The next morning, everyone present in Bamber's house was shot dead. Jeremy, the only survivor, was informed of the tragedy. Overcome with grief, he couldn't hold back his tears. Investigators treated him with respect, allowing him time to gather himself before beginning their questioning. Jeremy shared everything he knew, including the hardships Sheila went through, and the argument that had occurred at the dinner table on the evening of August 6th, shortly before he decided to leave the house. At first glance, the crime that Sheila committed seemed to be an act of desperation and impulsivity, because at the time, she was suffering from mental illness. After hearing Neville and June's suggestion that she should return her 2 sons to the orphanage, she felt the interference in her private life was unacceptable. When she lost control, she grabbed a weapon and shot Neville, June, Daniel, Nicholas, and finally shoot yourself. Investigators believe this is what happened. However, there is one very strange detail: Sheila had been shot twice in different parts of her body. How could she have managed to do this to herself? The actions of the detectives were puzzling. They decided to burn the blood-soaked bedsheets carpet, where the bodies were found. They explained that they wanted to help Jeremy avoid the painful memories of the incident. Furthermore, the weapon discovered at the crime scene, which was a key piece of evidence, was improperly handled by the investigator. They picked it up with their bare hands without wearing gloves. A few days later, Bamber's family funeral was held, and Jeremy attended. He seemed distraught over the tragedy, weeping over the coffins of his sister, parents, and nephews. However, on that day, the investigation was reopened. Relatives of Bamber's family have expressed concerns about Jeremy's unusual behavior. Despite his tears, he made odd remarks, such as referring to himself as the boss. They found him smiling with the look of someone satisfied with victory. They reported this to police, causing police to conduct a more thorough investigation. Crime scenes need to be investigated carefully and meticulously to avoid drawing hasty conclusions. The detectives began by examining the weapon. They discovered fingerprints from several individuals, including the investigator who had handled the gun without gloves. The appearance of Sheila and Jeremy's fingerprints is not surprising. Jeremy admitted the gun was his, explaining he had purchased it for hunting. It is also understandable that Sheila's fingerprints were on the gun, as the initial theory suggested she had used the gun as the murder weapon. A few days later, Jeremy's cousin secretly went to the Bamber family home to search the house. He convinced that Sheila was not involved in the murder. By this point, Jeremy had inherited to his family home and was living there alone. During the search, the cousin inspected every room and the closet, and he found a silencer for a .22 caliber carbine. Length of the gun, combined with the silencer, made it impossible for the attacker to have turned the weapon on themselves and fired. This discovery strongly suggested that Sheila could not have been the perpetrator. If Sheila had fired the gun without the silencer, a new question arises: why were traces of blood found on the end of the silencer? Sheila, who had been shot twice and was bleeding, could not have removed the silencer and hidden it deep in the closet. This suggests that the silencer was attached to the rifle in the murders. From this point, everything started to become clear. Julie, Jeremy's girlfriend, suspects him of being involved in killing his family. She contacted investigators and shared some information. She revealed that on the night of August 7th, Jeremy had called her, saying there were problems. However, when she tried to ask what was wrong, he abruptly hung up. She also recalled that shortly before the murders, he had repeatedly complained about his family. Most importantly, she revealed that the Bamber family had drawn up a will, which stated that all assets would be passed on to their children after their deaths. This made Jeremy very angry. He did not want to share the inheritance with his sister, Sheila. In addition, Jeremy also told Julie that he wanted to kill his family and blame it on Sheila, a mentally ill person. She reported all of this to the police, not because she wanted to help the investigation, but because she was feeling angry, so she had just learned that Jeremy had a new girlfriend. However, there is no direct evidence to prove Jeremy's guilt. He tried to mislead the investigation. He gave the police the name of a suspect, a plumber he to have hired. However, when investigators questioned the plumber, they learned that he was completely innocent. He also has a solid alibi, helped to remove any suspicion against him. As a result, Jeremy Bamber became the primary suspect. He was taken into custody due to his inability to provide an alibi. However, the police released him after failing to find evidence linking him to the massacre. Surprisingly, he was allowed to leave the country. After inheriting the property, Jeremy's financial situation improved a lot. He sold Neville's car and to Saint-Tropez, France. Upon returning to England on September 29th, he was arrested and charged with the murder of the Bamber family. The trial began on October 3rd. One of the main points raised in court was about Neville's injuries. His body showed multiple bruises, suggesting that he had tried to defend himself from an attack. The medical examiner speculated that the injuries were caused by the same .22 caliber carbine. Sheila, a petite and frail woman, it seemed unlikely that she could have inflicted such severe injuries on her father. In contrast, Jeremy appeared capable of doing so. Neville's body showed signs of a struggle, with multiple bruises. Sheila also received several blows, but there were no signs of a struggle on her body, and her nails remained intact. The defense countered these arguments that believed that Sheila suffered from mental illness, which made her the prime suspect, capable of committing a five-fold murder. They emphasized that she grew up on a farm, was skilled at handling guns, and was an experienced target shooter. Additionally, Jeremy's lawyers highlighted that Sheila's blood was fresher than the rest of the family's, so they claiming that she ended her life after killing others. This, they argued, could have been due to guilt or the sound of approaching police cars. However, the prosecution disputed these claims. If Sheila had been the killer and then end her life, then the policeman on duty near the house, they will hear the last gunshot. However, no sound was detected. Furthermore, Sheila could not have pulled the trigger with the silencer attached, as it would have been out of her reach. The silencer was also found in a closet, rather than on the carbine where it logically should have been. The defense is in a difficult position because it has no arguments to refute the prosecution. According to the prosecution's argument, the motive for the murder stemmed from Jeremy's anger when he learned the contents of the will. In the will, the inheritance was divided equally between him and Sheila. His greed for the inheritance led him to plan a massacre. On August 6th, between 10:30 p.m. and 11 p.m., Jeremy left his relative's house and went home. Later that night, he returned to their house on a bicycle he had taken from his mother, June, a few days earlier. He took a roundabout route and entered the house through an open bathroom window on the first floor. He climbed inside, retrieved the loaded gun, and went to June's bedroom. Then, he shot and killed her with 2 shots. Next, he aimed the gun at Neville, but Neville woke up and tried to defend himself, leading to a fight. During the struggle, he managed to shoot Neville. After killing Neville, Jeremy returned to the bedroom and killed Sheila and her 2 children, Daniel von Nicholas. He then staged the scene to make it look like Sheila was the perpetrator, he placing the carbine in her hands. With his crime complete, he left the house on his bike. He called his girlfriend, Julie, almost revealing what he had done, and then called the police to report that Neville had allegedly called him. However, if Neville was threatened with a weapon, he would contact the police, not Jeremy. Jeremy's actions seemed to make everyone feel strange. Why didn't he come to the crime scene immediately after Neville's call? After considering the evidence and various assumptions, the jury deliberated for 9 hours and reaching a verdict. Ultimately, Jeremy Bamber was convicted of 5 murders and sentenced to 5 life terms in prison with no chance of parole. Jeremy, meanwhile, maintains his innocence. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Martin McNeil. Michelle Marie Summers, a well-beauty queen and part-time model from California. She had always cherished 2 things, her family and God. At 21, she met Martin, a 22-year-old man, at an event for Mormon singles. Michelle believed he was the man of her dreams, but her parents did not agree with that. They disapproved of his bold, abrasive personality and felt uneasy around him, wishing that their beloved daughter would not date him. Like Romeo and Juliet, her parents' disapproval only made Michelle find her relationship with Martin more attractive. While her parents saw Martin as a narcissist, she believed he was an ambitious man who had overcome a difficult childhood. When he threatened to end his life if she left him, she agreed to marry him. Then, they eloped and secretly wed in 1978. Their honeymoon was short-lived. Within 6 months of their marriage, Martin was sent to prison, leaving Michelle to spend most of her time alone. Before meeting her, he had forged checks totaling $35,000. In addition to typical items like jewelry and clothing, he bought a grandfather clock, 60 pairs of socks, a refrigerator, and strangest of all, he bought enough chocolate-covered cherries to last a year. He got the idea for check forgery from a TV program about check fraud, which claimed it could be done in 60 minutes. Martin thought he could do it even faster. Sadly, forging checks was just one of Martin's many lies. He almost completely made up the story of his life. He had ambitious plans for his future, despite a difficult childhood. While many young men pick up the guitar to join rock bands and impress women, he chose a different route. He aimed to gain wealth and recognition by becoming a doctor. However, his poor academic record posed an obstacle to his dreams. Undeterred, Martin applied his usual tactic, which was to lie. He first used a fake certificate to enroll in a medical college in Mexico. After studying there for 6 months, he forged more certificates and was accepted into a medical university in California. His plan worked, and in 1984, he officially became a doctor. By that time, he had also taken note of the many attractive women among his patients. Later, when Martin realized the respect people had for lawyers, he decided he wanted a law degree as well. Once again, he pursued this goal dishonestly. While working at the Brigham Young University Clinic, he falsified his application to gain admission to the university's law school. He has been a chiropractor for many years, but if his fake qualifications are exposed, he would have faced severe criminal charges. In 1990, he was caught committing fraud and was banned from writing medical bills for 12 years. In 1998, Martin was expelled from the medical center following allegations of sexual harassment, inappropriate behavior, and incompetence as a doctor. However, this did not deter him. In 2000, the governor of Utah appointed he as the chief physician at the Utah State Development Center. On the surface, he appeared composed and normal, but a closer look revealed otherwise. For example, he frequently threatened to end his life. However, whenever someone criticized his actions, he used this threat. In 1994, after being discovered having an affair with one of his patients, Martin threatened to end his own life. In 2000, after his wife, Michelle, discovered he was watching pornography, he threatened to kill her with a meat cleaver. His 14-year-old son had to intervene and take the knife away. 5 years later, he was caught again watching explicit films and once again threatened to end his life. It was also revealed that Martin had multiple relationships with women across the country. 2 of these women, Anna Osborne and Gypsy Willis, were more than just casual lovers. Anna owned a laser appeal clinic and met Martin in 2005 while he was working as a consultant. At the time, Anna was facing a difficult divorce, and Martin offered to act as a mediator between her and her husband. The reason is that he has specialized training in the field of lawyers. After that, Martin and Anna's relationship quickly became intimate. In conversations, he often bragged that with just the right combination of drugs, he could kill people easily, making death look natural, like a heart attack. He even suggested to Anna that she should kill her husband, but she initially thought that he was only joking. As for Gypsy Willis, she is Martin's true love. They met online in November 2005. Martin presented himself as a doctor and lawyer, he impressing she with his intelligence and charm. At the time, Gypsy was a 29-year-old nursing student. He gradually realized that without she, his life would not be perfect. Until then, he thought he had successfully balanced his double life, keeping his affair hidden from both sides. But he was mistaken. In February 2007, Michelle grew suspicious. She noticed Martin behaving oddly and decided to check his phone records. She repeatedly saw Gypsy's name and number. So she confronted him about the affair. He admitted to it and promised to end the relationship with Gypsy on one condition: Michelle had to work on herself, specifically her appearance. He asked her to have a facelift. At first, she was hesitant. She felt she needed to prepare for the surgery, as she had high blood pressure and wanted to address that first. However, he reassured her that everything would be fine. Reluctantly, she agreed, hoping the facelift might improve their marriage. Then, they met the surgeon, who would perform the surgery. Just moments before Michelle was put under anesthesia, Martin pulled the doctor aside and handed him a detailed list of medications to prescribe. He assured the doctor that he would personally oversee Michelle's recovery. Trusting Martin's medical expertise, the surgeon agreed without any hesitation. The operation was a success, and the doctor prescribed the medications as Martin had requested. However, these medications were dangerous when combined. The doctor assuming Martin would manage them properly, so he has no reason to worry. On April 3, 2007, Martin brought Michelle home from the hospital. She was heavily sedated, her eye was bandaged, and Martin took care of her. Their eldest daughter, 22-year-old Alexis McNeil, was studying to become a doctor, following in her father's footsteps. On April 10, 2007, she returned home for the holidays and to care for her mother, Michelle, who was recovering from surgery. She immediately noticed that her mother looked unwell and wanted to help. But Martin refused to let her. He asked Alexis to leave the bedroom, insisting that he would take care of Michelle himself. The next morning, Alexis found her mother in a state of exhaustion, lethargic like a zombie. She confronted her father, Martin, and he admitted he might have given Michelle too many pills. He explained that Michelle had vomited, so he gave her additional doses. Shocked that her father, a doctor, was mishandling her mother's medication, she insisted on taking over the responsibility of administering the pills. In private, Michelle confided in Alexis, asking to touch each pill before taking it. With her vision obscured by bandages, she relied on the unique markings on the pills to identify them. Michelle revealed she didn't trust Martin, believing he was up to something sinister. She even pulled Alexis close and said that if anything happened to her, Martin will be the one to take responsibility. Michelle recovered quickly, allowing Alexis to rest and continue her studies in medical school. The last time she spoke to Michelle on the phone was at 8:45 a.m. on April 11, 2007. When Alexis asked Michelle how she felt about Martin, Michelle responded happily, saying he was sweet and loving. She reassured Alexis there was nothing to worry about. However, Alexis unable to shake a sense of foreboding that something was wrong. During the morning of April 11, 2007, Martin left for work as usual. He then picked up his youngest daughter, Ada, from school at around 11:35 a.m. When they got home, he told Ada to go find her mother, Michelle, while he started preparing dinner in the kitchen. Little girl ran through the house calling out for her mom, but received no response. Eventually, she checked their bedroom, but her mother wasn't there. Thinking her mom might be taking a bath, little girl headed to the bathroom. She stumbled upon a horrifying scene that would haunt her forever. She found her mother, fully clothed, lying face down in the bathtub. The water had turned a reddish-brown color. Shocked and terrified, she screamed and called for her father, Martin. When he arrived, he told Ada to go get help from a neighbor, while he worked to get Michelle out of the tub. Then, Martin made a series of calls to 911. Some calls were abruptly disconnected, while in others, he claimed to be a doctor performing CPR on his wife, only to hang up again. These unusual behaviors prompted the 911 dispatcher to keep recordings. Shortly after the discovery of Michelle's body, Martin's son Damien and Damien's girlfriend, Eileen, arrived at the house. Martin speculated that Michelle might have overdosed on medication and passed out in the tub. However, instead of checking the medication himself, he insisted that Eileen flush the pills down the toilet and dispose of the packaging. The medical examiner concluded that Michelle had died from a heart attack, and police reports classified her death as unnatural. On the afternoon of April 11, 2007, Alexis received a strange message from her father, Martin. He mentioned that Michelle wasn't getting out of bed and asked Alexis to call her. When Alexis tried, Martin answered and said that Michelle was now in the bathroom, not breathing, and that he had called an ambulance. He then hung up abruptly, without waiting for her reaction. Alexis, one of the last people to learn about her mother's passing, hurried to Utah. She was deeply saddened by her mother's sudden passing, and she suspected that her father might be responsible. Her first reaction was to check how much medicine her mother had left, as she knew how many pills her mother had taken and how many should remain. However, Damien's girlfriend, Eileen, had thrown the pills away before she could check. The medical examiner concluded that Michelle had died from a heart attack, and police reports classified her death as unnatural. However, Alexis suspects that her father, Martin, is responsible for her mother's death. She confided everything to her older sister, Rachel, but no one wanted to believe that their father could harm their mother. Martin enjoyed taking risks and pushing boundaries. However, when he told his daughters to go to church and pray for God to send them a new nanny to care for the younger children, he crossed a line. Their mother had been buried only 3 days earlier, but the daughters obeyed their father and went to meet the nanny. The woman introduced herself, and Martin acted as though he was meeting her for the first time. In truth, he knew her very well. She was his mistress, Gypsy. She introduced herself as Jillian, but Alexis immediately recognized her as Gypsy Willis. Alexis warned her father, Martin, not to bring Gypsy into their home, but he ignored her. Less than a month after Michelle's funeral, Gypsy moved in with he. She didn't behave like a nanny at all. She didn't care for the children, clean, cook, or do any household tasks. Instead, she spent every night in Martin's bed. Rachel and Alexis questioned their father, Martin, demanding to know why this so-called nanny wasn't doing her job. However, he threatened to kick them out of the house if they didn't treat Gypsy well. With the help of their aunt, Michelle's sister, Rachel and Alexis cooperated with the police to investigate their mother's death. Meanwhile, Martin was scheming again. Gypsy is in debt, and Martin came up with a plan to solve it. He told her that creditors wouldn't be able to find her if she changed her identity, and he found a way to make it happen. Martin adopted a 16-year-old girl named Giselle, then sent her back to her biological family in Ukraine so Gypsy could steal her name and social security number. Then, he told Giselle that he would adopt her in the summer, but she never heard from him again. When Martin returned to Utah, he found a new home for his 3 other adopted daughters. A year later, Giselle's cousin, Gil, visited to check on her well-being. Upon arriving, Gil discovered that Giselle was living in extreme poverty with her biological family. Meanwhile, in the United States, Gypsy was living a comfortable life under Giselle's identity. Martin even altered his will, leaving everything to Gypsy. At times, he referred to Gypsy as his wife, while at other times, he claimed she was his daughter. When Gil brought the real Giselle back from Ukraine, Martin and Gypsy's fraudulent scheme involving fake documents was immediately exposed. In 2009, both pleaded guilty to federal charges and served time in separate prisons. While he was incarcerated, Rachel and Alexis tried to produce evidence of his involvement in the death of their mother, Michelle. The chief medical examiner agreed to review Michelle's toxicology report. Although each drug in her body is not toxic when taken individually, their combination can lead to death. The examiner also concluded that Michelle could not have taken the drugs on her own. As Rachel and Alexis investigated further, they uncovered the extent of Martin's lies. They discovered that his entire career was built on forged credentials. Adding to the scandal, Martin was still collecting disability payments from a brief stint in the military. Martin completed his prison sentence for fraud, forgery, and identity theft in July 2012. Perhaps he had plans to change himself, maybe become an astronaut, a nuclear physicist, or whatever his imagination could come up with. But he never got the chance. In August 2012, he was officially charged with the murder of Michelle. Tragically, Damien, one of Michelle's children, wasn't there to support Rachel and Alexis during this time. A few years after Michelle's death ended his life. Rachel and Alexis testified against their father, Martin, thereby exposing all of his lies and fraud. It also came to light that he had begun sexually assaulting Alexis just 6 weeks after Michelle's murder. He was convicted of this assault in a separate trial. Years after Michelle's death, her family finally uncovered the truth they had been seeking. Martin had drugged Michelle with substances that were nearly undetectable, then left for work to establish his alibi. In 2013, Martin McNeil was found guilty of murder and sentenced. As for Gypsy, she was only charged with identity theft and has maintained a low profile since the trial. Michelle and Martin's daughters are determined to completely eliminate their father's negative influence and figure from their lives. Alexis got married and adopted her 3 younger sisters. She also changed her last name from McNeil to Summers, her mother's maiden name. Alexis explained that she didn't want to be Dr. McNeil. She wanted nothing to do with her. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Ana Carolina Lopez Enriquez. Ana Carolina Lopez Enrique was born in February 1996 in Mexico. Her biological mother was diagnosed with HIV, while her biological father was unemployed and homeless. With such circumstances, it was difficult for her to have a normal childhood. However, her life changed when she met a man named Efren Lopez Tarango, and his wife. Efren was born in 1924 in Chihuahua. By the age of 20, he and his first wife had 6 children, but their marriage eventually ended in separation in 1997. At the age of 65, he remarried his second wife, Albertina Enriquez Ortegon was 45 years old. They wanted children of their own, but were unable to conceive. So, they decided to adopt a child after some time. Efren and Albertina met a little girl who had just turned 1 year old, Ana Carolina. They completed the adoption process at a family integration center known as DIF after realizing their dream of becoming parents. They registered Ana as their daughter legally to ensure that she would receive full benefits. They then brought her to their home in the city of Chihuahua. From day one, the foster parents tried to give her all their love to meet all her needs. They hired a nanny named Margarita to care for her when they were not around. Margarita described Ana as a wonderful and obedient child. The relationship between the two was good. Sometimes, she shared with Margarita things that she had not had the courage to tell her parents, however. She never felt like she truly belonged in her new family. Over time, she began to harbor resentment toward her half-siblings. She felt that they maintained a relationship with her parents only for selfish, materialistic reasons. At that time, Albertina owned several bars and liquor stores in Chihuahua, as well as real estate in Texas, so they can afford to live a comfortable life and spoil Efren's stepchildren from his previous marriage. However, Ana, their adopted daughter, always received the most attention and gifts. They not only gave her their love, but also fulfilled all her wishes. One of Efren's grandchildren recalled that Ana was deeply cherished and always got whatever she wanted. She was among the first in the family to own a desktop computer, a mobile phone, and trendy clothes. People who knew Ana say that as a teenager, she always took care of her appearance. Her nails are always carefully taken care of, which showed that she frequented high-quality beauty salons. Her hair was soft, long, slightly wavy, and always neatly trimmed. When it came to clothing, she preferred simple styles, often wearing regular jeans or trousers, but she always looked impeccable at school. She excelled academically. Her teachers described her as the smartest student. She got along well with her classmates, never missed school, and was always diligent in her studies, although Ana always knew she was adopted. But the way she behaved with her adoptive parents was still very natural. Sometimes she argued with her mother, but to others, it looked like normal teenage rebellion. She seems quiet and doesn't interact much with her classmates. Maybe her introverted personality makes her withdrawn, or maybe she had trouble expressing her feelings during her school years. Ana was bullied several times by older teenagers who called her an orphan. These incidents deeply hurt her. She tried to talk to her parents, Efren and Albertina, about it, but they didn't take the issue seriously. Over time, this made her resent them more and more. She disliked that they were older than the parents of her peers. At times, she even thought about teaching them a lesson for not protecting her from being bullied. Over time, Ana feels increasingly resentful towards her adoptive parents, Efren and Albertina. Behind her gentle appearance lies an unapproachable personality. She gradually became more dissatisfied with them. However, it was difficult to pinpoint exactly when she started to change. She even became cruel to her dog, which really worried her parents. They concluded that she needed psychological help to uncover the root cause of her escalating aggression. So Efren and Albertina decided to send Ana to a boarding school in America. Before doing so, they planned a trip to Venice for her. What they didn't know, however, was that she had already started devising a plan a year earlier to distance herself from them permanently. She wanted to break free from their control and free herself from the constraints of life, realizing that, with her small size and weight, she could not carry out the massacre alone. She began looking for an accomplice. The person she targeted was a young man named Jose Alberto Grajeda Batista. Convincing him to join her plan was easy, as her parents disapproved of their relationship and had even forbidden them from seeing each other at one point. The plan also included Jose's friend, a young man named Mauro Alexis Gomez Zamaron. If the plan succeeded, Ana will receive a large inheritance from her adoptive parents, Efren and Albertina. Thanks to that, she can marry Jose and buy a house. However, things will not be as peaceful as a fairy tale because she has a cruel plan to kill both Efren and Albertina. Anna chose Friday, May 3, 2013, as the day to carry out her plan. She chose this day because Margarita was off work that day, and her father, Efren, would be out bowling from lunch until dinner. This means her mother, Albertina, will be at home with her after Efren left the house. She secretly brought in her accomplices, Mauro and Jose. She then went into the kitchen and called Albertina, pretending to need help finding a recipe. When Albertina arrived, Mauro silently approached her from behind and strangled her with a cable until she stopped resisting. She died, looking into the face of her adoptive daughter, Anna, while Anna stood by and watched her accomplices carry out the murder. Immediately after the attack, they injected Albertina with several doses of rat poison and hid her body. They then waited for Efren to arrive. When he entered the house, Anna used the same trick she had done with Albertina, luring him into the kitchen under the pretense of cutting fruit. There, he was caught off guard. Mauro quickly strangled him to stop him from breathing. However, Mauro was not sure that he was dead, so Mauro chained him to the table leg to prevent him from moving if he woke up. Ultimately, he was also injected with poison. With the first phase of their plan complete, the group stole all the money from the house and left to celebrate their success. When they returned, they drank beer and chatted casually, much like ordinary teenagers. The next morning, they cleaned up the crime scene, wrapped Efren and Albertina's bodies in plastic bags, loaded them into a white van. They then drove to the ring road, stopping briefly to buy gasoline, before selecting a suitable location to dispose of the bodies. A short while later, they realized they had nothing to ignite the corpses. They got back in the car and drove to the nearest store to buy matches. In the end, Jose burned their bodies. They were surprised that the fire spread so quickly that smoke was still clearly visible as they drove away. They then continued to burn Efren and Albertina's car. When they were done, they returned to the city. Mauro went straight home, while Anna and Jose stopped at a restaurant for something to eat. After visiting several stores to buy new mobile phones, Anna tried on various wedding rings, while Jose purchased a watch. Later in the afternoon, they attended a party at the place where Jose worked part-time as a waiter. That evening, the ministerial police in the city of Chihuahua discovered the charred bodies of two unidentified individuals. Due to the unusual condition of the bodies, the police requested assistance from forensic experts at the city prosecutor's office. In response, an expert named David Ochoa was sent to the scene. David was the specialist the authorities routinely consulted to profile criminals. David arrived at the scene within 20 minutes. The site was an abandoned lot in the southern part of the city, notorious for being a haven for criminals. Upon arrival, he immediately noticed that the bodies were burned. Judging by the condition of their teeth, he could easily tell that they were elderly. Their facial expressions suggested they were not anticipating the attack, showing no signs of fear or surprise. This led David to conclude that the victims likely trusted their killer over his 17 years of service. David had investigated 250 crime scenes. Part of his expertise involved constructing psychological profiles of criminals. He approached crime scenes as though they were works of art, analyzing every detail to understand the mind of the perpetrator. Even the smallest clues would reveal whether the attacker enjoyed inflicting pain or derived pleasure from the crime. Autopsies revealed that one victim was a woman in her 60s and the other a man in his 90s. The ages of the victims made the case extremely rare, especially since less than 1% of murders at the time involved people over 80. As experts worked to clarify the details of the incident, Anna attempted to report the disappearance of her parents, Efren and Albertina. Initially, she reached out to her aunt, who advised her to contact the police and file an official report. It seemed that she was very confused when she went to the police station to report her parents' absence for a long time. Anna explained to the police that, until a few days before her parents, Efren and Albertina, went missing. Everything had been normal at home after carefully reviewing her testimony. The police filed a report on the disappearance of Efren and Albertina. Police soon connected their disappearance to two bodies found earlier. After an investigation, the authorities had the results of the autopsy and confirmed that the two bodies found were Efren and Albertina. Since then, the police have focused all their efforts to clarify the massacre. According to investigators, they interviewed all relevant witnesses, including Anna. Initially, no one suspected her involvement. Everything unfolded according to her plan, and her tragic backstory helped her gain the trust of the police, who viewed her as a victim. However, Jose, a man with a troubled past, began to reveal contradictions in his testimony. Investigators pointed out inconsistencies in his testimony, causing him to waver. Within minutes, he confessed that he, Anna, and Mauro had killed her adoptive parents, Efren and Albertina, as part of a revenge plan she had devised. After confessing, he sought psychological support. Once he regained his composure, he provided a detailed account of the crime. According to Jose, the murders were motivated by Anna's resentment toward her adoptive parents, Efren and Albertina. One day, he asked if she wanted him to solve the problem for her. She agreed, and from that point on, the group worked together to devise a plan to kill Efren and Albertina. Meanwhile, Anna has a change of attitude after Jose is questioned again. Without hesitation, Anna confidently told the police that she felt no regret for her actions. Her only concern was that she could no longer marry Jose. The fact that she had taken the lives of her adoptive parents, who loved her like their own daughter, did not trouble her. According to Anna, she could no longer endure their presence in her life, and their murder gave her a sense of freedom. Her calm demeanor remained even as she recounted everything in court. Anna's calmness while committing this barbaric crime attracted the attention of the prosecutor's office. They noticed that she showed absolutely no remorse. Investigators and trial participants have emphasized Mauro's role, who is alleged to have suggested how the crime was carried out. Therefore, the prosecutor's office tried to prove that the crime was a deliberate crime with bad motives and aggravating circumstances, such as personal gain. Under the country's criminal code, such a crime can be punished with life imprisonment. In Anna's case, the law was applied differently. The Supreme Court determined that she was a minor at the time of the crime, meaning her maximum prison sentence could only be 15 years, and that was only if she were convicted of aggravated murder. In contrast, her accomplices, Jose and Mauro, faced the possibility of spending the rest of their lives in prison. According to available records, they appeared in court in 2013. Chilling testimonies from the criminals revealed disturbing details. Mauro, one of the accomplices, may have been mentally unstable at the time of the crime. He suggested that Jose and Anna use the stolen money to buy food and supplies for themselves, acting as if nothing had happened when the details of the case were clarified. Mauro was the most reckless and heartless person in the group. He is the one who gives orders and commands to Jose and Anna. The group gathered all the tools used in the crime, placed them in a bag, and loaded it into the car they used to transport the bodies. Upon arriving at the location, they had chosen to dispose of the bodies. Mauro took charge. He removed the bodies from the car and poured gasoline over them as their confessions were presented in court. The room was filled with cries of anguish. Some wept because they were hearing, for the first time, the horrifying details of how their loved ones were killed. Others were in shock, unable to believe that their children had been involved in a conspiracy to take the lives of two innocent people. Mauro's mother seemed to be the most affected by the situation. She occasionally glanced at their son, as if questioning whether he was still the same person she had raised. Unlike Jose and Mauro, Anna's trial was held in private because she was still a minor. This worked to Anna's advantage, allowing for a shorter trial that focused primarily on her mental health issues. She had already undergone a psychological evaluation, and the results were included in the case. The report was both shocking and revealing. Experts noted that, despite her young age, the girl showed serious signs of psychological disorders. She was said to have sadistic tendencies, lacked empathy, had no conscience, and was not emotionally attached to her parents. Criminologist David Ochoa, who was involved in the investigation, remarked that it was extremely rare to encounter a young criminal who didn't cry. He was particularly astonished that Ana was capable of harming the very people who had taken her in and provided her with a life of luxury. The prosecution then made a final argument, asserting that Ana was fully aware of her physical inability to carry out the plan on her own. Despite her adoptive parents' advanced age, she sought out someone with physical strength to help carry out the plan. Ana pleaded guilty to the murder of her adoptive parents under aggravating circumstances, as well as to robbery. As a result, she was sentenced to 14 years and 6 months in prison and was transferred to a social reintegration center for juvenile offenders. In contrast, her two accomplices, Jose and Mauro, who were adults at the time of the crime, each received a 37 years prison sentence. It is important to clarify the charges brought against each of the criminals. Judicial representatives concluded that, during different stages of the incident that led to the deaths of Efren and Albertina, both Ana and Mauro acted as the organizers. Ana was the one who proposed killing her adoptive parents. Efren and Albertina, however, it was Mauro who devised the plan for the crime. Consequently, Mauro was considered the main perpetrator as he executed the plan. While Ana played the role of an accomplice, Ana provided Jose and Mauro with information about her adoptive parents, chose the date of the attack, and assisted in preparing the crime after the verdict was announced. Relatives of Efren and Albertina spoke out. They could not believe that this had happened to their loved ones. They also found it disturbing that Ana showed no visible signs of remorse. One of Efren's nephews mentioned that Ana was not only loved by her foster parents, but also had all her wishes fulfilled. He said that although Ana sometimes showed rudeness like other teenage girls, she was still a gentle child. Additionally, Efren's family announced their intention to appeal to the state Congress to lower the age of criminal responsibility to 16 years. This is because Ana, due to her young age, could be released from prison relatively soon. Despite the severity of her crime, they found this deeply unjust. While they understand that lowering the age of criminal responsibility will not apply to Ana, they hope it can help prevent similar tragedies in the future. As Efren and Albertina's families grieved their loss, many of Ana's close friends were in shock. They could not believe she was capable of committing such a crime. Eventually, they decided to cut all ties with her, vowing never to speak to her again or visit her in prison. One of the people most affected by the tragedy was Margarita, Ana's former nanny. Devastated by the news of such a horrific crime, Margarita appeared in public in the days that followed looking exhausted. With dark circles under her eyes, she seemed so frail that many believed she might require immediate medical attention. When speaking to journalists, Margarita expressed shock and disbelief, saying that Ana's actions were unacceptable. She could not understand why such a terrible thing happened, and no one seemed to be able to come up with a reasonable explanation. 4 months after Ana was sent to the Center for Social Reintegration of Juvenile Offenders, a brief article about her appeared in a local newspaper. It portrayed her as a model inmate who strictly followed all the rules set by the center's administration. It was reported that Ana had no issues with any of the other prisoners. She actively participated in the judo program and never missed a training session during this time. She also resumed her studies and expressed hope of one day pursuing higher education at a university. According to available information, the only visitors she received were her 2 aunts from her biological mother's side. Although Ana was sentenced to 14 years and 6 months in prison, she was released after serving only 5 years. Her release was handled with strict confidentiality, as her case had caused widespread public uproar. In March 2018, Authorities decided to release her due to legal reforms addressing juvenile offenders. The changes reduced her maximum sentence to 5 years. After her release, Anna disappeared from public view, however. Reports indicate that Efren and Albertina's families filed a civil lawsuit to strip her of inheritance rights, arguing that her and her accomplices' actions led to the deaths of Efren and Albertina. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case. The case of Justin Murtis Barber. The only sound is the gentle lapping of the waves from the calm ocean. But is this peace ever undisturbed? The Bahamas, a beautiful Caribbean archipelago near Florida, attracts many American couples for weddings. April and Justin Barber were also preparing to seal their union with the bonds of marriage on this stunning beach. Their families joyfully that the profound bond of love was about to unite them for life. Everyone looked forward to a memorable celebration and a future of happiness. In 1993, at just 17 years old, April lost her mother, who had been battling a serious illness for a long time. Unfortunately, the disease proved too strong. The family struggled to cope with this loss. Her father, unable to handle his grief, fell into depression and became addicted to banned substance, which made it impossible for him to care for his children. As a result, April had to take on the responsibility of looking after her younger brother and sister. She effectively became a mother figure, managing household tasks, taking her baby brother to daycare, and her sister to school. April worked hard to keep everything organized and ensure that important tasks were not overlooked. She also focused on her studies, determined not to let her circumstances lead her to drop out of school or fall into depression like her father. Through her strength and resilience, April was able to navigate this difficult period in her life. The death of her mother motivated her to pursue a career in medicine and help fight cancer. April's determination is impressive. She successfully enrolled at the University of Oklahoma, achieving her first goal. Her time as a student was filled with more joy. She made friends and found happiness again. In 1998, when April turned 23, she met Justin Barber, 20-year-old who was in his final year at the same university. Although April had dated other guys before, none compared to Justin. He was ambitious, one of the top students in his class, and had a clear vision for his future. April quickly fell in love, and her heart raced every time Justin walked by. Soon, Justin fell also deeply in love with her and decided to introduce her to his parents. April made a great impression on them, and they were thrilled with their son's choice. Their close friends recognized that Justin and April was meant to be together, and that nothing could stand in the way of their future. The couple felt the same way and decided not to delay their plans. They took a confident step and decided to get married. Some people initially thought of April and Justin's decision was rushed, but they quickly changed their minds. And conquered by the love of the couple, in 1999, April and Justin took a week-long trip to the Bahamas to celebrate their long-awaited wedding. The celebration was a success, and they enjoyed their honeymoon. After moving to Georgia, they both found jobs. Justin became a salesman, while April worked in the radiology department, marking a significant advancement in her career. 2 years passed quickly. They was happy, and everything was going well. April and Justin faced their first challenge when Justin was offered a highly favorable position as a commercial director. It would be unwise to turn down such an opportunity, however. There was one issue. The job was located in Jacksonville, Florida, which was over 3 hours away from home. Despite this, April encouraged him to accept the job, confident that they would find a solution to the distance, since she couldn't leave her job in Georgia yet. She stayed behind while Justin moved to Florida. They agreed to meet on weekends in various locations. Although the situation was tough, they quickly adapted to their new circumstances. Time goes by without any major issues. On Saturday, August 17, 2002, April traveled to Florida to celebrate their 3rd anniversary. Their plans for the evening were simple. April wanted to have dinner at Caribas, a restaurant known for its delicious food and enjoyable billiards. Everything went according to plan. They enjoyed their meal and relaxed. After dinner, they got into the car, but chose not to return home just yet. Instead, Justin drove them to a small, secluded beach they often visited to celebrate special occasions. They loved this spot for its tranquility. After arriving at their meeting spot, they settled in their favorite area and decided to take a barefoot walk along the beach. Their moment was interrupted by the sudden appearance of a stranger. April and Justin exchanged confused glances. People were so rare in this area. Before they could fully process the situation, the man began to threaten them in the moonlight. His face was hard to see, but they could tell he was wearing a cap and yelling loudly. Justin suspected it might be a robbery. Just then, the man pulled out a weapon without thinking. Justin charged at the stranger to protect April. A violent struggle ensued, followed by the sound of a weapon. Justin lost consciousness during the fight. When he woke up, he found himself alone on the beach. The attacker had fled. Simultaneously, April was missing. He called out her name, but there was no response. What had happened? Had the criminal taken her, or had she managed to escape? Perhaps she had gone to find help. Justin ran along the shore, shouting her name, but to no avail. In his desperation, he nearly panicked when he suddenly spotted a figure a few meters away. Justin approached and realized it was April lying face down in the water. Motionless, she was unconscious. He pulled April onto the sand and tried to wake her by talking to her, but she didn't respond. In the darkness, he initially missed the signs of her injuries, but then, as he examined her, he discovered she had been attacked multiple times. A horror came over him, and he understood he needed to act fast. Justin attempted to lift April's body but couldn't manage it. Instead, he grabbed her by the waist and began dragging her toward the road, which was several hundred meters away. Aiming for the embankment that led to the highway to flag down a car for help, he had to climb the stairs from the beach to reach the crossing, which forced him to try lifting April again. But he failed, summoning his last bit of strength. He finally lifted her, but immediately collapsed to the ground. He did not understand what was happening to him. There was no trace of energy left. Suddenly, Justin realized he was injured as well. Discovering 4 weapon wounds on his body, he faced a tough decision between to stay with April and most likely die with her, or go in search of help, leaving his wife in the wilderness. Ultimately, he chose to seek assistance and made his way to the road to hitchhike. After 3 cars passed without stopping, he spotted his own car parked nearby. Struggling, he managed to reach it and got behind the wheel. Although he risked losing consciousness during the drive, he felt there was no other choice. As he entered the city, he continuously scanned for anyone who might help him. At a traffic light, when it turned red, he brought the car to a stop and dialed emergency services. The medics were the first to arrive, and he provided them with a detailed account of the situation. He urgently informed them that April was still on the stairs at the beach. The rescuers relayed this information to the police, highlighting that an armed robbery had escalated into an attack. The police faced a major challenge in locating April. Justin's information was not entirely accurate. He mentioned the beach and stairs, but failed to provide enough details to identify the exact crime scene. This resulted in a significant delay in their search. Eventually, they found April, but it was too late to save her. A murder investigation was initiated. Investigators visited the hospital to question Justin and gather information about the events of that tragic night at the beach. Upon entering his room, Justin immediately asked about his wife. They informed him that April had been found but could not be saved. After allowing him a moment to process the news, they asked him to describe the attacker in detail. Justin described the assailant as a tall, muscular man, weighing around 100 kilos. With an Asian appearance, his facial features were obscured, and he was wearing a cap and a loose t-shirt. However, these details were quite limited for investigation. The police recorded Justin's injuries, which included wounds on his arm, left shoulder, lower neck, and chest. Although these injuries were in sensitive areas, they were not life-threatening. and he was discharged from the hospital the following day. Justin attended April's funeral in Oklahoma, where he said goodbye to his beloved wife before returning to Florida. He is determined to help law enforcement find the dangerous killer. Justin spent over 10 hours at the crime scene, describing the events that occurred along the ocean shore and answering all the investigators' questions during this time. A potential lead surfaced. An eyewitness reported seeing a car parked next to Justin's on the night of the murder, however. This lead was considered unhelpful because the witness could not recall the car's model or license plate. Investigation into the case revealed that April was likely feeling anxious, so she carrying a stun weapon. Additionally, 3 weeks prior to the incident, her home had been robbed and her car had been broken into. This raised concerns that someone might have been stalking her or planning to harm her. To investigate further, they interviewed April's colleagues in Georgia. Everyone claimed that the break-in was unrelated to the murder, leading investigators to suspect that someone close to April and Justin may have had a motive to harm them. As the investigation continued, Justin became frustrated with what he perceived as a lack of urgency from law enforcement. He not realizing that detectives were deliberately keeping their true suspicions from him. They believed he was the actual killer. Justin's description of the robbery at a remote beach raised alarms among investigators, since such crimes were rare in that area. There had been no previous reports of similar incidents, and it seemed unlikely that a thief would wait several days to find a target. Additionally, after the attack, the assailant left behind Justin's belongings, including his wallet and April's diamond ring, which made it difficult to believe that the motive was theft. After Justin buried his wife, he returned to Florida. Eager to help with the investigation, he spent hours on the beach trying to remember details of the attack. However, detectives that closely observed his actions, they noticed that he seemed to be faking his grief. He covered his face with his hands, but did not actually cry. During questioning, Justin claimed that 3 cars drove past him without stopping to help. If this were true, at least one of the drivers should have called the police after seeing him hurt. But no calls were made. He also mentioned that he drove about 15 kilometers before stopping at a red light, which enabled him to call for emergency assistance. Investigators followed his route and were confused as to why he had driven such a long distance when there were numerous 24-hour stores nearby where he could have sought help. He passed by a McDonald's that was always open, as well as a pharmacy and a gas station, both of which never closed. Why did he need to drive 15 kilometers? These inconsistencies led the investigators to focus more on Justin. They started looking into the couple's seemingly perfect life, which once again revealed that appearances can be misleading from an outside perspective. It appeared that Justin was very devoted to April when they moved to Georgia. April's younger siblings came to live with them. However, the busy work schedules made it difficult to care for the children, so they decided to send them back to Oklahoma. Justin strongly opposed this decision, insisting that the kids stay with the family and becoming visibly angry. This reaction surprised their family members, who thought Justin was trying to maintain the appearance for show. Additionally, Justin often belittled April by constantly monitoring her weight and taking every opportunity to insult her if she gained any. This behavior took a toll on April, causing her significant emotional distress as she became fixated on dieting to avoid further criticism. Moreover, there is more serious evidence that points to trouble. April suspected her husband of infidelity during the weeks he spent in Florida. She believed he was seeing another woman, whose identity remained unknown. But she was aware that this woman attended tennis sessions with him. April had previously spoken to Justin about suspicions regarding his fidelity, but he denied everything. The investigators found Justin's mistress, Shannon Kennedy, an employee of a rental car agency that Justin worked. Shannon became involved in the investigation. She went to the police station for questioning and was extremely frank. She said that she and Justin really had an intimate relationship while she was being questioned. Justin was in the police station unaware that investigators were speaking with Shannon when asked about her. He denied any intimate relationship, however. When the police threatened to bring Shannon in to compare their statements, Justin confessed to infidelity. This revelation led investigators to discover that the seemingly perfect Barber family was far from normal. What was most important was that Justin turned out to be a liar. If he could lie about his extramarital affair, could he be lying about everything else? This made the investigators question his every word. The next step was to search the suspect's house, where investigators discovered 2 life insurance policies, each worth $2 million, and taken out in the names of both spouses. This fact serves as evidence against Justin, a second motive for April's murder. While the first motive was betrayal, investigators learned that the amounts on the insurance policies were arranged by Justin himself. It's clear that April was unaware of the total amounts, but she let him persuade her. Moreover, the summer of 2002 had been tough for Justin, as he fell into $50 of debt. Largely due to all his starting capital being burned up in the stock exchange, the connection gradually formed in the case. A husband deeply in debt and a $2 million life insurance policy taken out on his wife placed Justin at the top of the suspect list. However, there were significant hurdles in making a formal accusation. First, there was a lack of direct evidence linking him to April's murder. Second, Justin himself was attacked that night. With a bullet lodged in his chest, investigators was later determined that all bullets that hit him, including the one in his chest, missed vital organs. Investigators came to the conclusion that it was a wound that Justin had inflicted himself. The collection of evidence continued, which did not allow the suspect to be immediately arrested after moving to Oregon. Far from Florida, he found a job and eventually started a new relationship with a woman. It seemed that Justin's life had returned to normal, and American justice no longer bothered him. The case began to take on the character of a cold case. Despite the strong evidence against their primary suspect, investigators struggled to find anything that could lead to his conviction. Nevertheless, the Oklahoma justice system remained determined to prove his guilt. The female judge consistently pressured the state attorney general to charge Justin. The prosecutor hesitated to start the trial due to the uncertain outcome, but eventually, the prosecutor sided with the judge and sought justice so that Justin Barber's guilt would be established. In July 2004, nearly 2 years after April's tragic death, Justin was arrested and charged with her murder. It was another 2 years before the trial began in June 2006. Before discussing a conviction, the prosecutor needed to persuade the jury that Justin had premeditated the murder. The evidence pointed clearly toward him. They stated that if there had been another suspect or a viable lead, they would have pursued it. However, the lies and inconsistencies in Justin's own testimony only heightened the suspicion against him. The investigators presented the jury with reasons why Justin did not need to drive 15 kilometers to stop at the intersection, noting that there were 24-hour stores along the route. In response, Justin admitted he didn't remember clearly how he drove or what actions he took. It was surprising that he did not express this uncertainty earlier and only mentioned it after being questioned in court. Next, Shannon Kennedy spoke about her relationship with Justin. She revealed that she initially had no idea he was married, and the truth only came out after several meetings when it was the accused's turn to speak. He talked about April, claiming that he loved her but could no longer live with her in this context. The indirect nature of what was said was clear. Justin's lawyers hurried to persuade the jury that he mentioned this without considering murder, but simply because he wanted to end his marriage. A common situation for many couples. It was time for the most difficult part of the trial for the prosecutor. However, they had a crucial piece of evidence. An expert information technology specialist testified in court about the contents of Justin's computer and made a surprising discovery. 6 months before the murder, Justin searched online for how to attack himself without dying. He also looked up terms like chest-attacked wound trauma. This is suggesting that he intentionally researched areas of the body where a bullet could be struck without causing fatal harm. The defense also provided its expert, a qualified doctor, who explained the seriousness of Justin's injuries. He noted that one of the bullets came close to hitting an artery, which could have led to a fatal outcome. The discussion then shifted to the last piece of evidence. When investigators discovered April's body, they observed blood on her face that flowed in a single direction and was evenly distributed. This was surprising to the investigators because Justin claimed that April's body had been handled roughly and had changed position 18 times. The defense expert clarified that only one side of April's face was bloody because her body was lying face down and partially submerged in water. It is likely that the water washed away. The listed points were the main ones in the trial, and it was on them that the jury had to rely when establishing or refuting the guilt of the suspect. The trial was complex, lacking direct evidence and the murder weapon, which was never found. The discussions lasted over 28 hours across 2 days, but the verdict was still not reached. A third day was required, and there were fears that the discussion would continue. The jury ultimately found Justin Barber guilty of premeditated murder for killing April. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, despite Justin's repeated attempts to initiate legal proceedings to prove his innocence. None were successful. He will remain in prison for the rest of his life, with strong evidence, including digital data, financial transactions, and Justin's behavior before and after the case. The court made a fair judgment. Close a painful case. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Charlene Downs. Charlene Downs was born on March 25, 1989. In the West Midlands of England, she lived there until she was 10, when her parents, Karen and Robert Downs, decided to move to Blackpool, a coastal town in the northwest of the country. She was one of 4 children, and Charlene was the middle child. Charlene attended St. George's College, a secondary school with academy status. Her friends described her as cheerful, friendly, and thoughtful. With many relationships, however, she also had a rebellious personality, often causing trouble at home and at school. In October of her 3rd year, she was even briefly suspended from school. During this time, she was known for her adventurous lifestyle, often visiting the Blackpool Central Embankment, an area with many people who could be dangerous. Despite the potential dangers of this environment, 14-year-old Charlene seemed unaware of the risks she was facing. On Saturday, November 1, 2003, Charlene began her day as she would any other day of the week. She had breakfast with her family and visited a friend around noon. After returning home, she wanted to go for a walk with her sister Rebecca. At 5 p.m., the sisters left for town around 6:30 p.m. and, according to Rebecca, spent a few hours at the slot machines. They then went to dinner at around 7 p.m. Their mother, Karen, was handing out flyers outside an Indian restaurant when she saw Charlene and Rebecca across the street, both enjoying milkshakes. The sisters quickly crossed the street to chat with their mother about their plans for the evening. Rebecca said she was going home, while Charlene planned to meet her friends. While they were talking, Karen kept reminding Charlene to come home before curfew, which was set at 10 p.m. She emphasized this point because Charlene sometimes came home later than expected. After a while, Karen took her daughter to a phone booth so she could call her friends. They waited for her friends to arrive, and when they did, Charlene hugged her mother goodbye and went to a bar with them. This was the last time Karen saw Charlene. At 8:30 p.m., Charlene met a friend, and they went to a bar called Carousel. They returned to the city center around 11 p.m. Charlene's friend left her alone near Tobut Road and Abingdon Road, after which Charlene disappeared without a trace when she did not return home at the expected time. Her parents initially thought she might be a little late and went to bed. The next morning, when they realized Charlene had not returned, they did not immediately report her missing, assuming she was staying with a friend. Eventually, when no word came from Charlene. Her family went to the police to report her missing, but her parents were told they had to wait 48 hours before filing a missing person report. After 2 days without Charlene, Karen went back to the police, expressing deep concern that her daughter might never return. She also filed a missing person report. Initially, the police dismissed Charlene's disappearance as a normal act of teenage rebellion, assuming that she had voluntarily left home to challenge her parents' authority. The police asked for a description of Charlene. Her mother said that on the day she disappeared, Charlene was wearing black jeans with yellow detailing on the front, a dark t-shirt with a white diamond pattern, and black high-heeled boots. Karen was not sure if Charlene was wearing a white sweater by the time the police began their investigation. They had already lost a lot of time, despite extensive searches. They were unable to find Charlene or any of her belongings. Police interviewed Charlene's friends who were with her on the day she went missing, confirming that she had last been seen at around 11 p.m. They also reviewed surveillance footage that showed a girl resembling Charlene at the intersection of Dixon Road and North Pier at 9 p.m. She was accompanied by a woman with blonde hair who was wearing a long coat. However, this evidence was not very helpful, as it was recorded 2 hours before Charlene was last seen. Since the police had no other leads, they saved the video as potential evidence. Days turned into weeks without any updates on Charlene's whereabouts. At one point, Charlene's mother, Karen, realized that neither the national nor local press were reporting on her daughter's disappearance, seeking help. Karen contacted a local newspaper to request coverage of her daughter's story. The newspaper's representatives said they had heard about the case before and apologized for not reporting it sooner. They explained that the police had asked them not to publish any information because they believed Charlene had run away voluntarily rather than being kidnapped. This left Karen and Robert extremely angry that the police had not informed them that the case was being treated as a runaway case. They were also confused as to why the police had asked the newspaper not to share their story. Charlene's family was devastated and shocked when the police failed to find her in the crucial early days after her disappearance. Had the case been made public immediately, there was a chance that someone might have been able to provide useful information. Unfortunately, the lack of communication created a vacuum of information, and no vital leads emerged. Charlene's parents had no reason to suspect that their daughter had run away. The case eventually attracted media attention, and they believed that more people might have come forward with details if her story had been shared sooner. Sadly, weeks passed as news of her disappearance appeared in newspapers and on television, but no leads emerged regarding Charlene's whereabouts. Initially, the parents were concerned that no one would contact them with information. However, after Charlene's story was reported on the local news, the police received hundreds of tips. Several people reported seeing Charlene on the side of the road or in a shopping mall, while one witness claimed to have seen her on the train tracks. The police investigated these reports, but unfortunately, none of them were true. There were no cases involving Charlene. The police then interviewed all of Charlene's family members. Charlene's father, Robert, became the focus of the police investigation due to rumors of his cruel behavior and alcohol use. Robert reported to the police that he did not remember where he was when Charlene went missing. The police suspected that he might be involved in his daughter's disappearance. During a search of Charlene's home, the police discovered women's underwear and red nail polish among Robert's belongings. However, as the investigation progressed, this story began to unravel. Robert was receiving psychological support for gender identity disorder. His secret was that he disguised himself as a woman and called himself Martino when he was home alone. When the police began questioning Robert about his addiction, he became much more aggressive and at times even hysterical. This alarming behavior raised serious concerns for social services regarding the welfare of his children. Meanwhile, the investigation into Charlene's case stalled. The situation not only baffled the police, but also put considerable strain on Charlene's family, leading to their gradual disintegration. In the summer of 2004, a social worker visited the family for the first time to assess their situation. During this meeting, Robert lost his temper and threw a potato at the social worker. Shortly after this incident, their son was temporarily separated from his father out of concern for his safety. The boy was ultimately sent to his foster parents' home. Although the police suspected Robert, they were unable to file any charges because there was no evidence against him. The investigation continued as the police searched for new leads. They soon recalled that within the criminal network, there was a group involved in the exploitation of minors. The police believed that Charlene, along with many other girls her age, may have been influenced by members of a criminal organization. This theory was supported by the turmoil in Charlene's family. Social services reports indicated that Charlene frequently interacted with people who had been convicted of serious crimes, most of whom were friends or acquaintances of her parents. However, Charlene's family denied knowing any such individuals. In the months following Charlene's murder, no new leads emerged, and it appeared that the investigation was stalling. In March 2006, a local businessman came forward with information that dramatically changed the course of the case. He reported that he had been informed that Charlene had been murdered by two people associated with a fast food restaurant. He named both of these men as Iyad al-Bati, a fast food restaurant owner, and his friend and business partner, Mohammed Raveshi. Acting on this information, the police quickly stepped up their efforts and installed listening devices in both Mohammed's home and car. The devices were active for 4 weeks, after which the recordings were analyzed. The final report found that Iyad and Mohammed frequently mentioned a teenage girl and how they had disposed of her body. As a result, in 2007, Iyad and Mohammed were charged with disposing of Charlene's body. Iyad was also accused of abusing Charlene before her death. The trial began in March 2007 and lasted for several months. The prosecution presented theories about Charlene's death and how the perpetrators had disposed of her body. However, there was no physical evidence to prove that Iyad and Mohammed were involved in the crime, and Charlene's body has not been found. In addition, the recordings presented in court did not mention the specific victim by name. Therefore, the High Court jury could not reach a verdict on the guilt of these men. A retrial was set for April 2008, but during the trial, significant problems with the quality of the recordings were discovered. It is unclear what these problems were, but it is thought that the person responsible for transcribing them may have made erroneous conclusions about the nature of the recordings. As the recordings could no longer be used as evidence in court, the prosecution did not present any evidence, and both men were released. Iyad and Mohammed each received $250, or about $314, in compensation for their wrongful detention and trial. Iyad later faced a number of legal issues related to child abuse, but was subsequently released. As mentioned earlier, the relationship between Karen and Robert was troubled during a heated argument. Karen attacked her husband Robert with a knife. However, Robert did not pursue charges because the injuries were minor, and he believed Karen was suffering a mental breakdown due to her failure to achieve justice for their daughter Charlene. Charlene's parents were disappointed to see Charlene's alleged killers go free and even receive compensation. In 2009, Charlene's sister, Emma, 24, was tried for a racially motivated attack on a young man named Tariq. Tariq was the brother of a man previously accused of Charlene's murder. On the first day of the trial, Emma admitted to the attack but insisted that her actions were not racially motivated, since the man accused of killing her sister Charlene had never been convicted. The court accepted her guilty plea to common assault, which did not carry a prison sentence. Another case involving a member of Charlene's family led to a trial. During this trial, Charlene's younger brother admitted in court that he had attacked a man named Mohammed Raveshi, who had previously been charged with disposing of Charlene's body. Charlene's younger brother, was later fined and given a suspended sentence. Significant revelations emerged in 2014 when the Times newspaper published allegations against Charlene's parents, Karen and Robert. The newspaper reported that leaked documents showed that social services and West Midlands police had conducted a joint investigation into Charlene's family. This investigation focused on an incident that occurred in 1999. Shortly before the family moved to Blackfield, a man with a criminal record for child abuse was frequently seen at Charlene's home. The newspaper staff also made a disturbing discovery. Charlene's family moved out shortly after Charlene went to the local hospital. Furthermore, the Times reported that several men had visited Charlene's home after meeting Robert at a nearby pub. One of the men referred to Charlene as his girlfriend, while another confessed to paying Charlene's father, Robert, for access to her. This information brought Charlene's family into the public eye, but it did not prove their involvement in their daughter's disappearance. Following this media frenzy, the investigation into the case was adjourned. In August 2017, new information came to light when police arrested a 51-year-old man named Nigel Lloyd. The police were suspicious because Nigel had just left his business and moved from Blackfield to Preston at the same time Charlene went missing. However, after 48 hours of questioning, the police released him due to a lack of strong evidence against him. Karen later published a book in response to an article in the Times. In her book, Karen explained that she and Robert had their own group of friends and that sometimes one of them would stay overnight at their house. She felt there was no reason to worry because they were all local residents. Karen believes that they had nothing to do with the disappearance of Charlene or the other children by the time the book was published. It was too late initially. Most of the local population were genuinely sympathetic to Charlene's parents, but as more and more unpleasant details of their lives came to light, people began to view them as guilty of what had happened. Despite various theories emerging during the investigation, the police had no solid evidence against them. Accusations against Charlene's parents continued to surface in the media, mostly concerning their alleged interactions with men who had previously been convicted of abusing minors. Karen admitted that one of the guests had expressed affection for Charlene, but she immediately diffused the situation, and he never mentioned it again. When asked about the men who had stayed overnight at their home, Robert claimed he had never seen the children interact with any of the guests. After reviewing the documents, it became clear that Karen and Robert did not fit the mold of typical parents. Additionally, her father's struggles with addiction, mental health issues, and relationships with strangers exacerbated the situation. This highlighted that Charlene, like other children in the area, was always at risk. Tragically, Charlene's younger brother, who was struggling with depression and addiction, passed away from a drug overdose, bringing yet another heartbreaking loss to Charlene's family. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Samantha and Tessara Crespi. David Crespi comes from a family known for its success and respect. He is from Sacramento, California, and both he and his brother, along with their father, graduated from California State University. David earned an accounting degree with honors in 1983. His older brother, John, is the pride of the family, having become a professor of economics at Kansas State University. With his excellent academic performance, David easily found a job at a local bank, where he quickly rose to the position of CFO. However, the bank eventually closed. He then worked as a manager at a mortgage company in Sacramento. David has 2 children from his first marriage. However, his life took a difficult turn when his first wife died of a brain tumor. David devoted himself to providing for his children during this trying time. Fortunately, he soon met Kim, a woman he had known since college. Their friendship blossomed into a romantic relationship, and they began living together in 1994. Kim married David and adopted his children in 1997. They welcomed a son, and 4 years later, they had twins, Tessara and Samantha, in total. David has 5 children with 2 women. In 2001, David moved to a new and promising bank, prompting his family to relocate to Matthews, a small town in the suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina. By 2006, David Crespi was a vice president at a bank and lived with his family in a comfortable 3-story house in a prosperous area of Matthews. They had lived in this quiet neighborhood for nearly 5 years, which was considered an ideal place to raise children. The family shared a strong, loving bond and maintained a warm relationship with one another. David was regarded as a caring and active family man. They were actively involved in their local church, where David served on the finance committee. To many, it seemed that David had achieved his dream. What appeared to be a happy life actually concealed deeper problems. From a young age, David struggled with mental health issues. On the surface, he seemed to be a kind, devoted, successful, hard-working, and intelligent husband and father. However, he often suffered from severe bouts of depression that would come and go without warning. His condition worsened after the death of his first wife, but it only began to improve when Kim entered his life. She did her best to support him, and they both believed that this would help him overcome his challenges. Unfortunately, it was not enough. David's mental health issues began when he was 20 years old. At that time, he faced typical challenges in love and difficulties in planning for the future, which left him in a state of sadness. Adult life turned out to be more difficult than he had anticipated. Despite this, David still managed to excel in everything he did and worked tirelessly, not realizing that his success came at a high cost. As a young man, David did not seek help and preferred to solve problems on his own. As an adult, his depression often stemmed from the increased demands of his job and the responsibilities he assumed. His family was aware of his difficulties, and his colleagues noticed when he occasionally fell into a state of depression. However, David usually recovered quite quickly. There were no serious consequences for his work life. People understood his situation. He could take a day off, but his colleagues covered for him and provided sick leave when necessary. Their support seemed justified because, while his depression was in remission, David excelled in his field. The situation became increasingly serious. David was a devout Catholic, as was his entire family, according to his faith. End life was considered a sin. Despite this belief, David frequently contemplated end life during his time as vice president and even attempted it several times without success. During this period, David chose to spend time outdoors, searching for a suitable place to end his life instead of working. His wife tried to intervene and save him during these moments. After each attempt, David promised his family that he would not try to commit end life again. David struggled with depression that he could not control. Simply promising himself not to harm himself did not help him dispel his dark thoughts. His frustration grew. Instead of feeling like harming himself, he began to have thoughts about harming others. One time, when David and Kim were stopped at a traffic light, he seriously considered driving into a crowd. His wife thought he was joking. Unaware of how sincere his feelings were at this time, David tried several prescription medications, but they were ineffective. His attempts to deal with his mental health issues on his own made him paranoid and withdrawn. He became increasingly anxious about losing his job and going bankrupt. Often imagining the worst-case scenarios, Kim encouraged him to see a psychiatrist, who prescribed him antidepressants. David agreed and committed to the treatment regimen the doctor gave him. David had been on one medication for years, but it caused him to gain weight, which frustrated him. Annoyed by this side effect, he decided to stop taking the medication and try something else. He returned to the psychiatrist, hoping to adjust his treatment regimen for better results. By 2006, he was very familiar with his mental health problems, which had become more frequent and intense during these times. He was haunted by thoughts of harming others. David often thought about ending his life voluntarily, but because of his promise not to harm himself. He considered harming others instead, although he saw his doctor regularly. He never revealed these feelings. Hoping that a prescription medication would help him manage his difficulties, he feared losing everything he had built. He understood that if his doctor knew about his obsessive thoughts, it could lead to serious consequences, such as hospitalization, loss of his job, or separation from his wife and children. He tried not to think about harming others and fought against these thoughts. David's last appointment with a psychiatrist was on January 19, 2006. Shortly before the tragic events occurred, the psychiatrist prescribed new medication, believing that David was struggling with sleep problems and anxiety. He had also recently changed his previous medication, which could cause weight gain. The psychiatrist did not notice anything unusual. David was very good at hiding his emotions and preferred to rely on himself. On the morning of January 20, 2006, David's family was at home. Kim, David, and their 5-year-old twins, Samantha and Tessera, whom David adored, were all together. David was on sick leave due to his battle with depression. At that time, everything seemed normal, and there was no sign that anything was wrong. At 11:30 a.m., David received a call from his mother. It was a routine check-in. She was aware of his mental health issues and called at the same time every day to see how he was doing, and if he needed any support. They talked for about 15 minutes, during which David reassured her that everything was fine. His 3 older children were at school at the time at 12:15 p.m., while Samantha and Tessera were having lunch. Kim was looking after them. She felt confident that nothing would happen to the children because David loved them very much. She believed that they would be safe with him. Kim had gone out to get a haircut after lunch. David worked on the computer, but then took a break to spend time with his daughters. He suggested they play hide and seek, and they scattered to find hiding places around the house. David went into the kitchen and laid out some knives on the table. He then began to search for the twins. He saw Samantha first. She was smiling and unaware of the dark thoughts in his mind. Deciding to end the game, he quietly took her to the kitchen. Suddenly, he picked her up and placed her on the kitchen table. He took a knife and began to attack Samantha. The little girl screamed and struggled, and then she stopped breathing, hearing strange noises. Tessera came out of hiding and saw her father attacking Samantha, even though she was only 5 years old. She sensed that something terrible was happening, fearing for her own safety. She hid on the second floor of the house. Unfortunately, Tessera was easily discovered in the bathroom of the master bedroom. The little girl begged David not to hurt her, but David ignored her cries. He pinned her to the floor and began to attack her with a knife. Tessera cried, screamed, and fought fiercely against her father, but all in vain. Once a loving father, he had now left his 2 young daughters lifeless. David then considered end life, but ultimately decided against it. Instead of running away, he showered, changed clothes, and called 911. During the call, he calmly confessed that he had killed his 2 daughters and attempted CPR. Although he believed it was useless, as they were already dead, he answered the police's questions clearly, providing his details, his phone number, and his wife's location. He appeared calm rather than distressed and requested emergency assistance, expressing his desire to end his life. After the call ended, the police quickly arrived at David's home. David's home is located on Creek Road in an affluent area, where his family lives in a villa. It was surprising that such a tragic event could happen in a place known for its prosperity. When the police arrived, David was found sitting outside the house, waiting for them and for his wife Kim, who was still at the beauty salon. He surrendered and accompanied the police back to the house. Kim later returned home and learned of the situation. Initially, Kim feared that her husband had committed end life, but when she learned the truth, she was shocked. The police placed David under 24-hour surveillance and provided him with specialized clothing designed to prevent self-harm, removing any dangerous objects from his immediate vicinity. The case attracted considerable public attention. as a prominent and wealthy man, faced the possibility of the death penalty, which is legal in North Carolina. It is reported that David may reach a plea deal with the prosecution if he admits to 2 counts of first-degree murder. The prosecutor's office will agree not to pursue the death penalty as a result. David could face life in prison without parole. Many feel that this sentence is too lenient for the deaths of Samantha and Tessara, 2 innocent girls. During questioning, David mentioned that he had been dealing with depression and suggested that his actions were influenced by a new medication prescribed by his doctor. David has spoken openly about his illness, seemingly trying to shift the prosecutor's focus to his condition, which he believes caused the tragic events. He stated that he had struggled with depression for years and had finally reached a point where he could no longer bear it. Over the past few months, his condition had worsened significantly. He revealed that he had intended to harm strangers with his car, but also admitted that he had darker thoughts about his wife and 5 children while they slept. Amid his financial struggles, he was overwhelmed by the fear of losing his job as a bank vice president. He felt disillusioned by his inability to provide for his wife and children, which left him feeling unstable. On that day, he heard voices in his head telling him that there was no future, that everything was ruined, and that he had to kill his daughters. David believed that the twins were also suffering from depression, which was why they were not attending kindergarten. He eventually came to the disturbing conclusion that killing Samantha and Tessara might ease his own pain and prevent his mental health from deteriorating further. Kim shocked many by forgiving and supporting David. Despite his violent actions, she felt the death penalty was too harsh and believed it would not bring her children back to life. Despite her heartache over the tragedy, Kim has repeatedly told the media that executing David would only cause further harm to the family. She expressed relief that her husband did not commit end life before the police arrived. Kim believes that his actions stemmed from mental health issues that he could not control, including severe depression and psychosis. She remains hopeful that he will eventually recover and return to the loving and calm person he once was. The Supreme Court is reviewing the death penalty. Some believe that David deserves the death penalty for killing his 2 children. However, the prosecutor was reluctant to pursue this option because it would be difficult to convince all 12 jurors. As a result, the inquest continues to investigate more disturbing evidence beyond David's confession. David's attorneys have prepared a strong argument against the death penalty, emphasizing his long history of severe mental illness, which has spanned more than 2 decades. Prior to this tragic event, David had no criminal record. He was a devoted family man and a respectable citizen. There was no history of aggressive behavior in his past, and he had never harmed his wife or children. As Kim and other family members confirmed, the defense argued that on January 20, David's mental illness led to the tragic deaths of his 2 children. The attorneys, along with all of David's relatives, believed that he was experiencing a psychotic episode at the time of the incident. Kim stated that he had been working hard for years to control his mental health issues and had been successful. They had consulted with professionals, and he had been prescribed medication. However, Kim felt that the treatment he received was not effective enough over the years. The family continued to seek help and adhered to the treatment plan, ensuring that he took his medication as prescribed. A psychological evaluation revealed that David had more serious mental health problems than initially thought, rather than just depression and anxiety. He was diagnosed with psychosis. It became clear that the medications prescribed were not appropriate for his condition. Several years before the incident, David had been diagnosed with genital cancer and had been successfully treated. On the day of the tragedy, he was scheduled for a follow-up appointment. His attorneys presented medical documents showing that he had been prescribed several medications, one for depression, another for anxiety, and a third to help him sleep. While on the antidepressants, David gained more than 20 kg and had difficulty breathing, which forced him to stop taking the medication. His doctor then prescribed another medication in January, but it did not resolve his sleep problems. He finally returned to the doctor. Just one day before the murder, medical records show that David's treating physician removed his sedative and sleeping pills and prescribed a different sleeping pill instead. After this change, David began to notice alterations in his mental state, impairing his ability to think clearly. The day before the twins were murdered, he became delirious and acted erratically. Experiencing extreme mood swings, this exacerbated his anxiety about not being able to provide for his family. However, management at the bank where he worked described David as having an excellent work record, with no indication that he was in danger of losing his job. Despite this reassurance, David's mental state left him vulnerable to irrational fears. He worried that he might not receive a bonus from the bank, recalling that he had earned $45 the year before, but doubting that he would receive the same amount again. However, he later discovered that the bank had approved a large bonus during this difficult time. David was not in a clear state of mind and could not think rationally while awaiting the hearing in the case of Samantha and Tessara's murder. Kim visited her husband frequently. She repeatedly expressed her deep faith and love for him, believing that one day they would overcome the challenges caused by his illness and avoid such terrible tragedies. Kim only knew David as a kind and loving person. She believed that inadequate treatment led to the deaths of their children and the pain the family endured afterward. The scene of the crime was tragic. It is hard to imagine the pain Kim felt when she returned from the beauty salon to find the police and paramedics carrying her daughter's bodies. In fact, David's troubled thoughts began long before these tragic events. At the time, David was being treated with prescription medications. The initial treatment regimen helped control his negative thoughts to some extent, but things changed when adjustments were made. Experts later concluded that the new drugs had caused acute psychosis, according to David's own confession. When Samantha and Tessara were only 1 year old, he had thoughts of harming them. One day, while walking with the girls in the backyard, he hid a weapon in his pocket. Fortunately, he regained his composure and realized that he needed to stop. He convinced himself that he could overcome his challenges and that his family's financial situation would improve. David later returned to the doctor, but avoided discussing his thoughts of harming his children. Instead, he vaguely mentioned having bad thoughts about harming others and expressed his fear of losing his children and family by withholding information. He likely misled his doctors. As a result, he was prescribed medications that he had taken previously, which led to weight gain. In his confession, David admitted that, for many years, he had often felt like harming a family member, but he had been able to control these impulses until now. He believed that he had everything under control and could never actually act on the harmful thoughts. David recounted that after his wife got a haircut one morning, he was working on his computer when the obsessive thought returned. It urged him to kill his children. He thought that if he did so, all his worries would disappear because he would have no one to care for. David realized that his mental problems were related to his actions. During his initial interrogations, David responded coldly. When asked why he killed both girls instead of just one, he explained that because they were twins, they needed to die together. However, the situation changed when David received comprehensive treatment. It was only then that he understood the severity of his crime. He admitted that he had never shared his thoughts about killing his children. His wife, Kim, did not fully understand the gravity of her husband's condition. David's doctor was not held responsible after the tragedy. Citing David's failure to provide accurate information, the doctor was unaware of many of David's hidden struggles, which prevented him from fully assessing the situation. Furthermore, all medications have side effects that can vary from person to person, and doctors cannot predict such severe reactions. David received support and treatment while in prison, which had a positive impact on him. During his preliminary hearing, he began to understand the extent of his responsibility for his actions and fully admitted his guilt. Psychiatrists confirmed that he was fit to stand trial. David's family was shocked by what had happened. His father had seen him just a week before the tragic event. He appeared healthy and showed no signs of impending disaster. On July 30, 2006, the hearings took place. Ultimately, David Crespi reached a plea deal and pleaded guilty, while the prosecutor's office chose not to pursue the death penalty. This decision caused considerable controversy, dividing public opinion. With one group calling for the death penalty, the trial was brief, and the jury sentenced David Crespi to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The trial was short but filled with deep emotion. David's family cried, and he struggled to hold back tears as he came to terms with the pain his actions had caused. He felt he would be haunted by guilt for the rest of his life. Even the police officers who had arrived at the scene that day were in tears. A young officer went upstairs and discovered Tessera's body. He checked for a pulse, hoping she was still alive. The police carried the injured child down the stairs, praying that she would survive. However, when the doctors examined the body, it was clear that she had died from her injuries. What the police felt as a pulse may have been his own heartbeat. This story raises many questions. Was David truly unaware of what was happening at the time? Were his actions influenced by a psychotic episode? He appeared normal when he talked to his mother and wife and went to work. However, his actions were completely different. When his wife, Kim, left the house, everything seemed normal. But he caused a massacre right afterward. He considered end life, but decided against it and tried to calm down. So why didn't he try to control himself in the moment when he killed the child? Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, United States. His father, chemist Lionel Herbert Dahmer, and his mother, Joyce Annette Dahmer, faced various challenges. Joyce struggled with depression and possibly other mental health issues, which required her to take large amounts of medication, even during her pregnancy. Despite these difficulties, their first child, Jeffrey, was born healthy and displayed a cheerful and curious personality in his early years. However, when he was about 5 years old, he developed a double inguinal hernia and required surgery. Initially, Jeffrey was described as an active and cheerful child, but after the surgery, his parents observed a change in his demeanor. He seemed more withdrawn and showed signs of depression. One day, Jeffrey witnessed his father taking an animal carcass from under the house and placing it on a tray. The sight caught Jeffrey's attention, and he became curious. Without hesitation, he began playing with it. His father, Lionel, whose job and academic career required him to move several times, eventually earned a doctorate in chemistry. This achievement led Jeffrey's family to settle in Bath, Ohio, where they found a large plot of land surrounded by trees. After moving to Ohio, Jeffrey began to avoid social interaction, preferring solitude. However, he cherished the time he spent with his father, participating in various activities together, such as fishing. Jeffrey enjoyed watching his father prepare fish and was curious about what was inside them. Lionel noticed this passion in his son and suggested that he learn taxidermy. Although Jeffrey did not experience physical abuse at home, he grew up in a tense atmosphere. His parents, Lionel and Joyce, argued frequently. Lionel often criticized Joyce for not taking good care of their son, while Joyce expressed frustration with Lionel's long hours at work and school, feeling that he was neglecting the family. Over time, they realized that Jeffrey was quite withdrawn and had difficulty connecting with others. When Jeffrey was 7, he got his first pet, a dog. This brought him immense joy, and he took great care of the dog, even bringing it along when he explored the area for animal carcasses. At the same time, Joyce became pregnant with their second child. To help Jeffrey feel included, his parents allowed him to choose a name for his younger brother, which he decided would be David. Jeffrey attended primary school in Bath, where his father made efforts to encourage him to socialize with other children. Although these efforts were largely unsuccessful, on weekends, Lionel spent time with Jeffrey, tending to the garden and bees together, and attending local fairs. Their relationship was strong, and Jeffrey even wrote poems for his father during this time. His mother, Joyce, was hospitalized for depression and anxiety, which was a difficult period for the family. When Jeffrey entered secondary school, he continued to enjoy dissecting animals and began to explore his abuse. During this time, he kissed a boy from the neighborhood, which led him to realize that he was attracted to boys. Although he struggled to accept this part of himself, Jeffrey faced increasing anxiety due to his father Lionel's homophobic views. Throughout high school, he endured bullying. To cope with the challenges around him, he turned to alcohol. This dependence on alcohol led him to come to school drunk and even drink during class. As a result, he was often reprimanded and disciplined. His behavior varied greatly. Sometimes he was the center of attention, while at other times he was very shy in school. Jeffrey often engaged in behavior that was considered humorous or eccentric. He acted as the class clown, frequently imitating epileptic seizures and making sheep noises during class. As he grew older, he even began drawing chalk sketches of human bodies on the classroom floor. Around the age of 14 or 15, Jeffrey began to experience disturbing obsessive thoughts related to sex. This struggle intensified over time, leading him to develop various fantasies. However, unlike typical teenage fantasies, Jeffrey's were more disturbing. Jeffrey found his senior year of high school particularly challenging. Because his parents decided to get a divorce, Lionel moved away and took refuge in a hotel, while Jeffrey's mother also decided to leave home, taking her youngest son, David, with her and leaving Jeffrey alone. Just a few weeks after graduating, he began to explore his fantasies more freely. Jeffrey's fantasies began to take shape in a disturbing way. He often thought about a young man he had met while playing sports on his way home. This man frequently jogged in the evenings, shirtless, and Jeffrey found himself drawn to him. Jeffrey then imagined a scenario where he would hide in the bushes, and when the man passed by, Jeffrey would attack him and take him home. However, on the day, Jeffrey decided to make this fantasy a reality. The young man did not show up for his usual jog. Another fantasy that Jeffrey cherished was picking up a hitchhiker and taking him home. In this scenario, they would share an intimate moment and eventually live together in harmony. This fantasy became a reality in 1978 when Jeffrey was driving down the road and spotted a young hitchhiker who fit his ideal type. Jeffrey stopped and offered the young man a ride in his car. The young man, eager to go to the summer music festival, accepted Jeffrey's invitation to have a beer at his house first. His name was Stephen Hicks, and he had just turned 18. They returned to Jeffrey's house together after drinking a few beers. Stephen asked Jeffrey to fulfill his promise to take him to the festival. Jeffrey hesitated, and an argument ensued. Eventually, Stephen decided to leave, which escalated the situation in a fit of rage. Jeffrey hit Stephen with a dumbbell, causing him to fall to the floor, unconscious. In a panic, Jeffrey strangled Stephen until he stopped breathing. Jeffrey then processed Stephen's body, placing it in 5 black trash bags. He loaded the bags into his car and drove off to find a place to dispose of them. Jeffrey began to drive erratically and out of his lane. The patrolman saw Jeffrey and asked him why he was driving like that. Jeffrey confided in the officer about his struggles with insomnia and his parents' recent divorce. Expressing feelings of hopelessness about his life, he remained polite and calm throughout the conversation. When the officer asked about the car, he explained that it was full of trash and that he was looking for a place to properly dispose of it. Jeffrey made a good impression on the officer, who asked him to return home. Jeffrey complied and returned to his house with the trash bags containing Stephen's body. He eventually hid the bags in the basement. The next day, he continued to process Stephen's body. Attempting to crush the bones, he then scattered them in various locations behind the house. In the days that followed, Jeffrey paid attention to newspapers and news reports, hoping to find any updates on the missing man. However, he found none. He had committed a serious crime, but it was still a secret. This prompted him to repeat his crime. A week after Jeffrey's mother, Joyce, left home, Lionel found his son living alone and increasingly anxious. He encouraged Jeffrey to find a job, but Jeffrey showed little interest instead. He spent his days drinking. To help, Lionel took him to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and arranged sessions with psychologists. Lionel encouraged Jeffrey to pursue his studies at Ohio University. Although Jeffrey did not outright refuse, he continued to drink and think about Stephen's murder. In the following months, he donated blood in exchange for money to buy alcohol. By the end of the semester, his academic difficulties led to his expulsion from the university. However, Lionel was determined and convinced Jeffrey to enlist. Believing that military discipline could have a positive impact on him, Jeffrey complied and successfully passed the selection process. His passion for medical care took him to San Antonio, Texas, where he trained to become a military medic. Allowing him to gain a deeper understanding of human anatomy, Jeffrey eventually found his passion in his work. After 6 months, he had changed dramatically. Military physical training not only improved his physique, but also made him more sociable. For the first time, Lionel witnessed his son smile, although not while on leave. After completing his training, Jeffrey was deployed to a base in Germany. Unfortunately, his struggles with alcohol were not resolved, and when the authorities learned of the problem, he was discharged from the military upon returning to the United States. Jeffrey chose to distance himself from his father instead of going home. He settled in Miami, where he rented a hotel room and found work at a diner. At first, his life seemed okay, but it quickly became unstable. Jeffrey drank more and soon found himself unable to afford a hotel room, forcing him to sleep on the beach. Realizing that he could not continue like this, he decided to ask his father for financial help. Lionel, understanding that giving his son money might cause him to drink more, Lionel bought Jeffrey a ticket home instead, determined not to give up. Lionel committed to helping his son find a better path forward. Lionel picked Jeffrey up from the airport. Jeffrey greeted him with a bright smile, which initially led Lionel to believe that his son was simply happy to see him. However, it soon became clear that Jeffrey had consumed a significant amount of alcohol before the flight. Faced with this reality, Lionel decided that the best course of action would be to send Jeffrey to live with his grandmother in Milwaukee. During his time with her, Jeffrey matured considerably. He developed a deep respect for his grandmother, who, by many accounts, was the only person he felt truly close to. Jeffrey helped her with various chores around the house and even attended church with her. During the first few weeks, Jeffrey began reading the Bible, which helped him alleviate some of his negative thoughts. However, he still struggled with his fantasies. One day, he stole a male mannequin from a clothing store and hid it in his closet. He saw the mannequin as the perfect companion because it never rejected him, made no demands, and inspired him. However, one day, his grandmother discovered the mannequin and was horrified. She insisted that Jeffrey leave the house, but he calmed her down by promising to get rid of it one day. While sitting in the library, a man approached Jeffrey and handed him a note instructing him to meet in the men's room. Although Jeffrey chose not to accept the invitation, the incident sparked something within him, and after 9 years, his repressed desires resurfaced. In 1985, Jeffrey frequented the sauna, looking for men to satisfy his desires. When he found someone who interested him, he would invite them out for a drink. However, he would secretly put sleeping pills in their drinks. When the victim passed out, Jeffrey would lie down next to them. After one of his victims was poisoned and hospitalized, Jeffrey was banned from the club he frequented. Despite this, he continued to seek abuse partners in other bars and clubs. He preferred muscular young men and did not care about their skin color or hair color. In November 1987, Jeffrey met a man named Stephen Twomey, a dancer and waiter from Michigan. They fell in love and decided to spend some time alone together. They rented a room at the Ambassador Hotel in Milwaukee, where Jeffrey offered Stephen a cocktail that had been spiked with sleeping pills. When Jeffrey woke up the next morning, he found bruises on Stephen Tuomi's forearms and chest, along with blood coming from his mouth. Jeffrey did not remember killing Stephen and could not believe it had happened. However, he was in the same room as the corpse, which prompted him to quickly leave the hotel, cross the street, and buy a suitcase. He returned to the hotel, placed Stephen's body in the suitcase, paid the bill in the lobby, and called a taxi. A hotel employee helped Jeffrey carry the suitcase, which was so heavy that the employee jokingly asked if there was a body inside. Jeffrey replied, "Yes," and they both laughed. Unaware that the employee was helping to dispose of a body, Jeffrey then went to his grandmother's house with the suitcase and secretly took it to the basement. He began to process Stephen Tuomi's body. He placed it in trash bags and then moved the bags containing the body into the trash. Several months later, Stephen Tuomi's relatives filed a missing persons report after he was last seen the night he met Jeffrey while working as a waiter, although police initially believed that Stephen had simply left. His family did not accept this explanation. They had been unable to contact him, and his belongings were still in his house. However, the investigation stalled, and there was no explanation for Stephen Tuomi's disappearance. After not being held accountable for his actions, Jeffrey increasingly embraced his dark desires and became a serial killer over the next 5 years. He committed multiple murders on his free nights and weekends. After 3 months of searching for new victims, Jeffrey met a 14-year-old boy at a bus stop near a club. Jeffrey approached the boy and offered to pay him $50 to sleep with him, and unfortunately, the boy accepted the offer. They took the bus to Jeffrey's grandmother's house, where she was sleeping. While they went down to the basement, there, Jeffrey drugged the boy and then strangled him. He became more perverted, abusing the boy while he was dead as the body began to decompose. Jeffrey treated it like those of his previous victims. He began to dispose of the body of James Dox Tater. He packed the body in plastic bags and threw it in the trash. The victim's name was James Dox Tater, according to the Tampa Bay Times. James had run away from home 2 days earlier to escape his abusive stepfather, although his mother filed a complaint. Police showed little interest in finding him. Jeffrey's fourth victim was Richard Guerrero, a 22-year-old Hispanic man. They met outside a gay bar called Phoenix. Jeffrey lured Richard to his grandmother's house, promising to pay him to spend the night in the basement. Jeffrey drugged Richard with sleeping pills, then strangled him with a leather strap and began abusing him after he was dead. After satisfying his desires, Jeffrey put the body parts in garbage bags, which were picked up by a garbage service the next day. Richard's family urged the police to investigate his disappearance, but the officers believed he had left home voluntarily. However, Richard's sister believed otherwise and convinced her relatives to hire a private investigator. Richard's father, who worked at a golf course, spent all his savings on the investigator. But it turned out that the investigator was a fraud. Meanwhile, Richard's mother prayed daily for his safe return. Jeffrey's grandmother asked him to move out because she was fed up with him. He was no longer the grandson she used to go to church with. His drinking, his habit of bringing young men to her house late at night, and the stench from the basement and garage were too much for her to bear. As a result, Jeffrey had to find a new place to live. He rented a small apartment where he stayed for a while as he prepared for his next victim. Jeffrey then found his fifth potential victim, a 13-year-old boy who came to his apartment. They met on the street, where Jeffrey offered to pay the boy in exchange for allowing him to take pictures. However, when Jeffrey tried to touch the boy got scared and ran away. The 13-year-old then informed his parents about the incident, and they reported it to the police. As a result, Jeffrey was arrested and charged with harassment. He received a 1-year sentence at the Milwaukee Correctional Center. Although he was allowed to leave during the day to go to work, he was required to return to the facility at night just days before his sentence began. Jeffrey met his sixth victim, a 24-year-old man named Anthony Sears. On March 25, 1989, Jeffrey and Anthony met at a bar, and when the bar closed, they decided to spend the night together. They could not go to Anthony's house because his girlfriend was there. Jeffrey asked a friend to drive them to his grandmother's house. When they arrived, he took Anthony to the basement and committed his usual act. However, this time was different. After disposing of the body, he put it in several different garbage bags. Some of Anthony's remains he threw in the trash, while others he kept in his locker at work. During Jeffrey's trial, his lawyer successfully reduced his sentence to just 10 months in a rehabilitation center. Jeffrey's father wrote to the judge, asking that Jeffrey be allowed to attend an alcohol treatment program while incarcerated. However, the judge received the letter too late, and Jeffrey was released without undergoing any rehabilitation. After his release, Jeffrey upgraded the security in his apartment by installing cameras and an alarm system. On June 24, 1990, Jeffrey went on a killing spree while at one of his favorite bars. He noticed a man named Raymond Smith. Jeffrey drugged Raymond and abused him before killing him. Just a month after killing Raymond, Jeffrey targeted another victim, 27-year-old Edward Smith. Edward was lured in with an offer of $100 to have his picture taken. With Jeffrey pretending to be a photographer, Edward was last seen alive talking to Jeffrey at a club. In September 1990, Jeffrey murdered his 8th victim, 22-year-old Ernest Miller. Ernest was attractive and healthy, and he worked as a dancer. He agreed to pose for photos in Jeffrey's apartment for $50, which put him in a dangerous situation. Jeffrey followed his usual pattern, plied Ernest with a mixture of alcohol and strong drugs. And this time, however, Ernest woke up before Jeffrey could strangle him. Resulting in a struggle, Jeffrey attacked Ernest with a knife. After killing him, Jeffrey disposed of the body as he had done with his other victims. But this time, he took a more disturbing step. Not only did he handling of the body, he also put it in the freezer for later use. The foul smell emanating from Jeffrey's apartment caused complaints from neighbors. To explain the smell, Jeffrey claimed that his meat refrigerator had broken down. To solve the problem, he bought a large plastic barrel and filled it with acid to destroy the body parts. Although he was able to remove some of the evidence, the smell remained. It seemed that Jeffrey did not care about the complaints from the neighbors. On September 24, 1990, Jeffrey continued his killing spree, targeting David Thomas, a 22-year-old man whom he had met at the Grand Avenue Mall. Jeffrey convinced David to return to his apartment for a few drinks, offering additional money if he posed for a photo. After giving David a drink laced with sedatives, Jeffrey found himself not attracted to him, but was afraid David would be angry when he found out he was drugged. As a result, Jeffrey strangled him. He took photos of handling of the body disposal and kept those photos for unknown reasons. Jeffrey stopped killing for 4 months. He met his next victim in February 1991. This victim, his 10th, was 17-year-old Curtis Straughter. Curtis had just lost his job as a nurse and was looking forward to becoming a model and attending college. They met at a bus stop, tragically. This was not the end of Jeffrey's list of victims. Just 2 months later, he met Errol Lindsay, a 19-year-old boy who was also lured by the promise of money to take pictures. The next victim was 31-year-old Tony Hughes. Tony, who had lost his hearing as a child due to medication, was cheerful and sociable. He loved to dance and made friends easily. Tony was last seen on May 24, 1991, at a club. That night, Jeffrey invited him to his house, where he continued his killing spree. Unfortunately, Tony's body was left in Jeffrey's apartment for several days before being dumped in a dumpster on May 26, 1991. A tragic chapter unfolded when Jeffrey met Conorak Synthesophone, a 14-year-old Laotian teenager. Conorak was the younger brother of a previous victim who had escaped from Jeffrey. The situation was heartbreaking. Conorak had accepted money from Jeffrey to help his family, who was struggling financially. and faced challenges due to their limited English skills. Konarak had been drugged by Jeffrey. After ensuring that Konarak was unconscious, Jeffrey left to buy alcohol, planning to strangle him upon his return. However, Konarak regained consciousness and escaped from the apartment. He wandered the streets until he encountered two girls, who were the nieces of Jeffrey Dahmer's next-door neighbor. The girls saw Konarak, who was injured, and they called 911 for help. The police, along with paramedics, rushed to the scene. When they arrived, they found Konarak lying in the middle of the road. They picked him up and placed him in a nearby building. When they began asking him questions, Jeffrey turned around, claiming that Konarak was his boyfriend, with whom he had just had a fight, and that he had been drinking heavily. The police accepted Jeffrey's explanation. The two girls begged the police to check Jeffrey's identification, but they refused. They urged the officers to listen to them. Pointing out the bruises and cuts on Konarak's body, the girls insisted that they knew the boy and that he was definitely a minor. The officers rudely told the girls to be quiet and even threatened to arrest them for trying to help Konarak. Had the officers checked Jeffrey's identification, they would have discovered that he was on mandatory parole for a previous conviction for molesting Konarak's brother. Instead, both officers assisted Jeffrey in taking Konarak back to his apartment, and one officer even placed him on the sofa. Once inside the apartment, the officers detected a foul odor, which Jeffrey explained was from a broken refrigerator filled with rotting meat that he had not disposed of. Surprisingly, the officers did not find anything suspicious. Jeffrey even showed them pictures of Konarak that he had taken earlier. Another alarming detail that the police overlooked was the body of Tony Hughes in the bedroom. The police left the scene, but the two girls called them back to check if they needed to identify themselves as witnesses. Unfortunately, the police dismissed their concerns, claiming it was just a disagreement between two adult partners. When Jeffrey was left alone with Konarak, he decided to inject hydrochloric acid into the boy's head. He did this to create a zombie. He had always dreamed of having a companion who would obey his every command without question. These experiments ultimately led to Konarak's death. Jeffrey then handling of the body. Konarak's, the next victim added to Jeffrey's list, was 20-year-old Matt Turner, whom he met at a bus stop. Matt accepted Jeffrey's offer to travel to Milwaukee for a professional photo shoot at his apartment. Jeffrey drugged, strangled, and handling of the body Matt's. On July 5, 23-year-old Jeremiah Weinberger became Jeffrey's victim. They met at a bar in Chicago, and Jeremiah went to Jeffrey's apartment with the promise of spending the weekend with him. Jeffrey then drugged Jeremiah and injected boiling water into his skull twice, causing him to fall into a coma and die 2 days later. Oliver Lacey, a 23-year-old athlete, accepted an offer for a photo shoot for money and accompanied Jeffrey to his apartment. There, Lacey and Jeffrey engage in intimate activities. Just 4 days later, on July 19, Jeffrey lured 25-year-old Joseph Bradehoff to his apartment. Joseph was strangled and laid out on Jeffrey's bed, covered with a sheet. For 2 days, on July 21, Jeffrey began handling of the body Joseph's. On July 22, 1991, Jeffrey approached a group of 3 friends at a bar while they were drinking. He introduced himself as a photographer and paid $100 to anyone to pose for photos. Only one, a 32-year-old homeless man named Tracy Edwards, agreed. Jeffrey invited Tracy to his apartment and mixed him a cocktail, which he offered to all of his victims. However, Tracy, being as smart as he was, noticed a strange taste in the drink and decided not to finish it. Jeffrey then attempted to be intimate with Tracy, but Tracy repeatedly refused. Eventually, Jeffrey handcuffed one of Tracy's hands, leading to a struggle. During the fight, Jeffrey grabbed a knife, but Tracy fought back, hit Jeffrey, and escaped from the apartment. On the street, Tracy spotted a police car and informed the officers about the incident. They accompanied him to Jeffrey's apartment. Jeffrey tried to prevent the police from searching his place, but it was extremely dirty, and a strong stench filled the air while going through boxes in Jeffrey's apartment. The police discovered gruesome photos of his victims. It was clear that they were dealing with a serial killer. This was the beginning of the end for Jeffrey Dahmer. The police searched the apartment and arrested Jeffrey inside the refrigerator. They discovered numerous human body parts. In a container filled with acid, they found more human body parts. They also found photographs that not only revealed the bodies of the victims, but also documented the many abuses Jeffrey had committed against them. Jeffrey felt relieved that he no longer had to hide such a secret that he had kept for so many years. When he realized that he would have to face the consequences of his actions, he chose to confess everything. His confession took 6 weeks to complete and spanned 159 pages, detailing every aspect of his crimes, from his first murder to his last victim. Jeffrey explained that at first, he just wanted to lie next to the men he had kidnapped. But over time, his desires became increasingly horrific. He admitted that the only way to keep his victims with him forever was to kill them. Jeffrey Dahmer claimed that he did not want to kill. Instead, he wanted a zombie-like companion that he could control indefinitely. Psychologists who worked with Jeffrey concluded that his motive was not abuse, but a desire for control. After Jeffrey's detailed confession, the court no longer had to prove his guilt. It only needed to determine his sanity. At the time, Wisconsin did not have the death penalty if he were found insane. He would have been committed to a mental hospital indefinitely. Although there was a possibility that he could be released in the future, the trial began on January 30, 1992, due to the serious nature of the case. Many security measures were taken in the courtroom, including the installation of bulletproof glass throughout the 2-week trial. Jeffrey sat silently, listening to arguments from both the prosecution and the defense. Jeffrey's defense strategy was simple. They did not try to argue that he was not guilty of murder. Instead, the defense sought to have him hospitalized for treatment. They argued that he needed psychological and psychiatric help, asserting that normal people do not commit such heinous acts. The prosecution, in contrast, argued that, under Wisconsin law, a person who remembers his actions and understands what they have done should be considered sane. A few days later, a verdict was reached. Jeffrey Dahmer was sentenced to 15 consecutive life sentences, plus an additional life sentence for a 1978 murder, bringing the total to 16 life sentences. Jeffrey expressed deep remorse for the pain he had caused the families of his victims and acknowledged their anger toward him. He was then sent to a maximum security prison in Wisconsin. During his time in prison, Jeffrey rediscovered his faith in God. Recalling the times he had gone to church with his grandmother, he asked a local priest to baptize him, and the priest agreed. On July 3, 1994, a fellow inmate, Osvaldo DeRuthi, attacked Jeffrey, who was hospitalized but survived then. In November of that year, another inmate, Christopher Scarver, who was also serving a life sentence, attacked him. Christopher had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Christopher disliked Jeffrey, who described himself as religious, a characterization that Christopher found insincere. In November, Christopher, Jeffrey, and another inmate, Jesse Anderson, who was serving time for murdering his wife, cleaned the inmate gym. They were also required to clean the locker room and restrooms used after gym class when they were left unsupervised. Christopher seized the opportunity to carry out his dangerous plan to attack both Jeffrey and Jesse. First, he followed Jeffrey into the locker room, where Jeffrey was cleaning. He took a steel bar from the weight room and struck Jeffrey in the head several times. He then attacked Jesse in the same manner. Afterward, he left the gym and called security. Both Jeffrey and Jesse were taken to the hospital, but Jeffrey died en route. His death was confirmed upon arrival at the hospital. Jesse remained in a coma for 2 days before being taken off life support. In accordance with Jeffrey's wishes, his body was cremated, and his ashes were divided among his parents. When details of Jeffrey's crimes became public, protests erupted, focused on the fact that two police officers who handed over a boy named Konarak Synthesomphone to Jeffrey were not prosecuted. The two police officers did not check the identity of the boy or Jeffrey and did not search Jeffrey's apartment. After the trial, the two police officers involved were suspended from duty. They later appealed the dismissal, and the judge ruled in their favor, and awarding each $55 in compensation after being reinstated. Both officers resumed their careers. Additionally, after the investigation was completed, the building where Jeffrey Dahmer lived was demolished in the hope of helping people forget the horrific events that occurred there.